Tonight we are going to talk about a place. Not a person, a place. A fortress that watched the history of Middle-earth unfold from behind its ring of stone for over 3,000 years. A fortress that was built by the greatest civilization of men, abandoned by that civilization's decline, given to a wizard who was supposed to protect it, and transformed by that wizard into a factory that manufactured the instruments of the world's destruction. Isengard is one of the most important locations in Tolkien's mythology, and almost nobody tells its full story. You know the Isengard of the movies The Tower, the pits, the Uruk-hai being pulled from the mud. You know the Isengard that Saruman rules from, the Isengard that the Ents destroy, the Isengard where Gandalf is imprisoned on the roof of Orthanc with the wind in his hair and the eagles on the horizon. But Isengard is older than Saruman. Much older. Isengard existed for 2,000 years before the wizard arrived. Isengard was ancient when Saruman was young, and the story of how a fortress built to defend civilization became the fortress that nearly destroyed it, that story is the story of Isengard, and that story has never been properly told. Tonight we tell it. From the first stone to the last flood. From the Inmemorians who built it to the Ents who broke it. The complete history of a place that was many things: stronghold, watchtower, garden, laboratory, prison, factory, and that was, in the end, the physical expression of the most devastating betrayal in the history of Middle-earth. This one goes deep. Stay with me. Part 1. The Builders. The Inmemorians built Isengard, and to understand what they built, you need to understand who they were, because the who explains the what. The Inmemorians were the greatest civilization of men in the history of Middle-earth. Descended from the Edain, the faithful men who had fought alongside the Elves and the Valar against Morgoth in the First Age, the Menrians were given the island of Menna as a reward. They built a civilization on that island that surpassed anything else in the mortal world. Great ships, great cities, great learning, and the specific quality of Menrian craftsmanship that made their works endure for millennia. When Imenor fell drowned beneath the waves in the catastrophe that ended the Second Age, the faithful remnant escaped under Elendil and his sons. They came to Middle-earth. They established 2 kingdoms, Gondor in the south and Arna in the north. And they built. The Inmemorians built the way that a people build when they know their craftsmanship can survive them. They built in stone. Not ordinary stone and Memorian masonry, the specific quality of stonework that used techniques brought from the drowned island, techniques that produced structures of extraordinary durability. The walls and towers that the Inmemorians raised in Middle-earth were designed to last, not for centuries, for ages. Isengard was one of these constructions, built at the southern end of the Misty Mountains, at the strategic gap between the mountains and the White Mountains of Rohan. The gap that would later be called the Gap of Rohan. Isengard was positioned to command the western approaches to Gondor's territory. The Sindarin name was Angrenost, the Iron Fortress. The name tells you what the builders intended. This was not a palace or a pleasure garden. This was a military installation. A stronghold designed to control a strategic position, built with the specific quality of Memorian engineering that made it as close to impregnable as mortal craft could achieve. The builders chose the location with the precision of military engineers who understood landscape as a weapon. The ring of stone, the outer wall of Isengard. The great circle of rock that enclosed the fortress complex was not entirely constructed. It was partly natural. The Menrian engineers used the existing ring of rock as the foundation for their wall, supplementing nature's work with their own masonry, creating a defensive perimeter that was part mountain and part wall, and that combined the strength of both. The ring of Isengard was a mile across. a full mile of enclosed space protected by walls that even the Ememrians' own siege engines could not have breached. Inside the ring, gardens, buildings, workshops, storerooms, the infrastructure of a major military installation, capable of housing a significant garrison and sustaining it through extended siege. And at the center, Orthanc. Part 2. The Tower of Orthanc. Orthanc is not like any other structure in Middle-earth. Orthanc is unique, and the uniqueness is the first clue that the tower is more than a building. Orthanc was carved from a single block of stone, not built carved, not assembled from individual blocks of masonry, fitted together with mortar and skill, carved from a single, continuous piece of dark, glossy, unidentifiable stone that the Ememrians shaped into a tower 500 feet high. The stone is not ordinary rock. Tolkien describes it as hard, dark, and smooth, a material that resists damage with a stubbornness that goes beyond physical durability. The Ents, who can tear apart walls of ordinary stone the way you might tear apart a sandcastle, cannot scratch Orthanc. The tower survives everything. Every assault, every siege, every age of neglect and disrepair. Orthanc stands, unchanged, undiminished, as though the passage of time and the application of force are equally irrelevant to its existence. The tower has 4 pillars, 4 great prongs that rise to a flat summit, like a hand with spread fingers. The specific shape of the tower, the 4-pronged crown, the dark surface, the smooth, unjointed, monolithic quality of the construction gives Orthanc a quality that is not quite human, not quite mortal. The tower looks like something that was grown rather than built, something that rose from the earth rather than being placed on it. The name Orthanc has 2 meanings. In Elvish, it means cunning mind, the specific quality of intelligence that designs, that engineers, that shapes matter to serve purpose. In the Rohirric language, it means the cunning mind too, but with a different connotation, closer to treachery or snakecraft. The dual meaning is prophetic. The tower serves both meanings across its history, the legitimate cunning of the Ememrian builders, and the treacherous cunning of the wizard who later inhabits it. Orthanc was designed as a watchtower, not a residence, a watchtower. The tower's height and position gave it a commanding view of the approaches to the Gap of Rohan, allowing the garrison to see threats approaching from the west, the north, and the south. The tower was the eye of the fortress, the elevated point of observation that made the military installation effective, and in the tower, the Ememrians placed a palantir. Part 3. The Seeing Stone. The palantir of Orthanc is one of the 7 seeing stones that the Ememrians brought from the Drowned Island. The stones were gifts from the elves, objects of elvish craftsmanship that allowed communication across great distances, that let the holders see far-off places and communicate with the holders of the other stones. The placement of a palantir in Orthanc was strategic. The Seeing Stone Network was the Ememrian communication system, the technology that allowed the 2 kingdoms, Gondor and Arna, to coordinate their governance across the vast distances of Middle-earth. The palantir in Orthanc was one node in this network, connecting the western fortress to the other palantry in Minas Tirith, Minas Ithil, Osgiliath, and the northern capitals. The palantir made Orthanc more than a fortress. It made it a communications hub. The watchtower's physical observation capability was augmented by the Seeing Stone's supernatural observation capability, creating a surveillance and communications platform that gave Isengard strategic significance far beyond its military function. Here is the specific detail that matters for the later story. The palantir remained in Orthanc when everything else changed. When the garrison withdrew. When the fortress was abandoned. When the keys were given to Saruman. The palantir stayed, waiting in the tower, waiting for someone to look into it. The Palantir of Orthanc would eventually be the instrument through which Saruman contacted Sauron. The seeing stone that the Inmenrians had placed in the tower for legitimate surveillance would become the channel through which the Dark Lord's will reached the White Wizard's mind. The communication technology that was designed to coordinate the defense of the West would become the mechanism of the West's betrayal. The stone did not change. The stone was the same stone that the Inmenrians had placed in the tower 3,000 years earlier. The stone did not become evil. The stone was used for evil, used by a wizard whose purpose had changed while the stone's capability had not. The distinction between the tool and the user is the distinction that runs through the entire history of Isengard. The fortress, the tower, the stone, none of these are evil. They are instruments. Instruments that were designed for defense and were redirected to aggression. Instruments that were built to serve civilization and were repurposed to destroy it. The evil is in the user, not in the instrument. And the history of Isengard is the history of an instrument changing hands. Part 4. The strategic position. Let me explain why Isengard's location matters. Because the location is the reason the fortress exists, and the reason the fortress's fate shapes the fate of Middle-earth. The Gap of Rohan is the only major land passage between the northern and southern halves of western Middle-earth. To the east, the Misty Mountains, running from north to south, impassable except through a few dangerous passes. To the west, between the southern end of the Misty Mountains and the western end of the White Mountains, the Gap. The corridor. The specific geographic feature that determines the flow of armies, trade, and communication between the northern and southern kingdoms. Whoever controls the gap controls the connection between north and south. Whoever holds the gap can allow or prevent the passage of armies, the movement of the communication between peoples that keeps alliances alive. Isengard controls the gap. The fortress sits at the southern end of the Misty Mountains, overlooking the gap from a position that allows the garrison to monitor and, if necessary, block the passage. Any army moving through the gap must pass within view of Orthanc. Any force attempting to invade Gondor from the north must deal with Isengard first. This is why the Inmenrians built Isengard where they built it. Not because the location was beautiful, because the location was strategically decisive. Isengard was the cork in the bottle, the fortification that sealed the gap and prevented the enemies of the West from using the passage to bypass the defensive lines that the Denadane had established. The location also explains why Isengard's allegiance matters so much. When Isengard is loyal, when the fortress serves its designed purpose of defending the western approaches, the gap is sealed and the defensive system works. When Isengard is hostile, when the fortress turns against the peoples it was built to protect, the gap becomes a threat rather than a defense. The cork becomes a blade. The thing that was designed to keep the enemies out becomes the thing that lets the enemies in. Saruman's betrayal is devastating precisely because of Isengard's position. When Saruman turns, the Gap of Rohan, the strategic passage that Isengard was designed to defend, becomes the staging area for Saruman's own armies. The fortress that was supposed to protect Rohan becomes the base from which Rohan is attacked. The geographic advantage that the Inmenrians designed into the fortress is converted from a defensive asset into an offensive weapon. The geography has not changed. The gap is the same gap. The fortress is the same fortress. The tower is the same tower. What has changed is the will that operates through them. Part 5. The Golden Age. For the first centuries of its existence, Isengard functioned exactly as the Inmenrians intended. A garrison, a watchtower, a communications hub, a military installation that secured the western approaches and maintained the connection between the northern and southern kingdoms. The fortress was maintained by Gondor. The garrison was Gondorian soldiers of the South Kingdom, posted to the western frontier, maintaining the fortification and the surveillance that the strategic position required. The Palantir was used by the garrison commanders to communicate with the other seeing stones, maintaining the network that connected the scattered positions of the Nidane defensive system. The Golden Age of Isengard was quiet. This is important. The fortress's best centuries were its least dramatic. The garrison watched. The tower stood. The stone communicated. The gap was secured. Nothing happened, because the fortress's purpose was to prevent things from happening, and the prevention was successful. The quiet success of the Golden Age is the success that nobody celebrates. Nobody writes songs about the centuries when nothing went wrong. Nobody tells stories about the watchtower that watched and saw nothing threatening. The Golden Age of Isengard is invisible in the mythology because the mythology attends to the dramatic, to the battles, the betrayals, the moments of crisis, and the Golden Age had none of these. But the Golden Age was the foundation. The centuries of quiet, competent, undramatic military administration that kept the gap secure and the communication network functioning those centuries were the foundation on which everything else was built. The fortress's later significance, its role in Saruman's war, its destruction by the Ents is significant precisely because the fortress was important. And the fortress was important because the Golden Age had established it as the keystone of the Western defense. The Golden Age ended, as Golden Ages do, through the slow process of decline that affects all mortal institutions. Part 6. The decline of Gondor and the emptying of Isengard. Gondor began to decline, not suddenly, not through a single catastrophe or a decisive defeat, through the specific, gradual, cumulative process of demographic shrinkage, territorial contraction, and institutional exhaustion that affects empires when they have been running for too long. The plagues came. The Great Plague of 1636 of the Third Age killed a significant portion of Gondor's population. The kingdom that had once been able to garrison every fortress and man every wall found itself unable to maintain the full scope of its defensive system. Garrisons were withdrawn. Outposts were abandoned. The ring of steel that the Dunedain had built around their territory was allowed to rust. Isengard was one of the positions that lost its garrison. Not immediately, the process was gradual, the withdrawal incremental, the abandonment a matter of decades rather than a single decision. But over the centuries of Gondor's decline, the garrison at Isengard was reduced, then reduced again, then reduced to a token presence, then withdrawn entirely. The fortress was empty. The walls still stood. The tower still rose. The Palantir still waited in its chamber. But the people, the garrison, the engineers, the administrators, the specific human infrastructure that made the fortress function, the people, were gone. An empty fortress is a vulnerable fortress. Not because the walls are weak. Isengard's walls were as strong as ever. Because a fortress without a garrison is a fortress that can be occupied by anyone who arrives. The walls that were designed to keep enemies out are equally effective at keeping new occupants in, and the new occupants may not be the ones the builders intended. The emptying of Isengard is the emptying of purpose. The fortress was designed for a purpose, the defense of the gap. When the garrison withdrew, the purpose withdrew with it. The walls remained. The tower remained. The purpose was gone. The vacant fortress stood for centuries. Stood while Gondor continued to decline. Stood while the Rohirrim settled the lands around it. Stood while the world changed and the peoples moved, and the strategic situation that had justified the fortress's construction evolved into something the builders could not have predicted. The fortress waited. Waited for someone to give it a new purpose. Waited for the hand that would turn the key and occupy the tower and look into the seeing stone and use the ancient infrastructure for whatever purpose the new occupant chose. The fortress was patient. The fortress had time. 3,000 years of memory and engineering had given the fortress the specific quality of durability that outlasts the purposes that justified the construction. The fortress would wait for Saruman. Part 6b. The Rohirrim and Isengard. The Rohirrim's relationship with Isengard is one of the most complicated and least discussed relationships in the mythology of the Third Age, and it requires specific attention because the relationship shapes the war that the Rohirrim fight. When the Othod settled Calanadhon and became the Riders of Rohan, Isengard was already on their border. The fortress, still nominally Gondor's property, still theoretically part of the Gondorian defensive system, sat at the edge of the territory that the Rohirrim had been given. The fortress was not part of Rohan, but it was on Rohan's doorstep. For the early centuries of the Rohirric kingdom, the relationship was unproblematic. The fortress was empty, or nearly empty. The Rohirrim had no interest in occupying a stone fortress. The horse culture had no use for walls, and the Rohirric military doctrine was built around open-field cavalry warfare, not fortification defense. Isengard was Gondor's concern, not Rohan's. But Isengard's strategic position meant that whoever controlled the fortress controlled the western approach to Rohan's heartland. The Gap of Rohan, the corridor between the Misty Mountains and the White Mountains, was the Rohirrim's western border. And Isengard sat at the northern end of the gap, commanding the approach. An enemy in Isengard was an enemy at Rohan's throat. The fortress that was designed to protect the west could, in hostile hands, threaten the Horse Kingdom's most vulnerable border. The Rohirrim knew this. The Rohirrim lived with this knowledge for 500 years, watching the fortress from across the gap, wondering who would eventually occupy it and what the occupant would intend. When Saruman arrived, when the White Wizard was given the keys to Orthanc, the Rohirrim were relieved. The fortress was now held by an ally. The western approach was secured. The threat that the empty fortress represented was resolved by the arrival of a being whose purposes were, apparently, aligned with the Rohirrim's survival. The relief was genuine. The relief was misplaced. The ally in the fortress would turn out to be the enemy in the fortress, and the specific quality of trust that the Rohirrim placed in Saruman, trust based on reputation, on status, on the institutional authority that the head of the Astari order commanded, that trust would be the instrument through which the enemy accomplished his betrayal. The Rohirrim trusted Saruman because they had no reason not to trust Saruman. The wizard was vouched for by Gondor. The wizard was the head of the organization that was supposed to be coordinating the resistance against the shadow. The wizard had the specific quality of institutional credibility that made questioning his purposes seem not just rude, but foolish. And the institutional credibility was the exact quality that made the betrayal so devastating. The Rohirrim were betrayed not by a stranger, but by a neighbor. Not by an enemy they could see coming, but by a friend they had no reason to suspect. The fortress on their border, which they had accepted as a benefit, became the source of their gravest threat. Part 6c. The stages of Saruman's transformation of Isengard. The transformation of Isengard under Saruman was not a single event but a process, and the process has identifiable stages that correspond to the stages of Saruman's own corruption. Stage 1. The study. For the first decades of Saruman's residence, Isengard changed slowly. The wizard studied the ring lore, used the fortress's library, used the Palantir for legitimate surveillance, maintained the gardens. The fortress during this stage was recognizably the fortress the Enmemrians had built, modified only by the addition of the wizard's personal study and workshop. Stage 2. The expansion. As Saruman's ring lore studies deepened and his private agenda developed, the modifications began. New workshops, New forges. The specific incremental expansion of the industrial capability that the Ring Lore research required. The gardens began to shrink, not dramatically, not visibly to the casual observer, but incrementally, one tree at a time, one garden bed at a time, each removal justified by a specific need. Stage 3. The industrialization. The tipping point, the stage at which the modifications ceased to be additions to the existing fortress and began to be replacements of it. The gardens were no longer shrinking. The gardens were being eliminated. The forges were no longer small workshops. The forges were industrial furnaces. The pits were no longer research excavations. The pits were breeding chambers. Stage 4. The militarization. The fortress was now a war machine. The Uruk-hai program was at full production. The weapon forging was at industrial scale. The intelligence network was fully operational. The Wormtongue operation was in place. The fortress had been completely converted from its original purpose defense of the Western approach to its new purpose, the production of the military capability necessary for the conquest of Rohan and the seizure of the Ring. Stage 5. The deployment. The 10,000 Uruk-hai marched from Isengard to Helm's Deep. The fortress disgorged its product. The manufacturing process reached its culmination. The army, fully equipped, fully armed, marched out through the gates and into the landscape that the fortress was originally designed to protect. The 5 stages: study, expansion, industrialization, militarization, deployment are the 5 stages of Saruman's corruption expressed architecturally. Each stage of the fortress's transformation corresponds to a stage of the wizard's internal transformation. The fortress is the wizard's soul made visible in stone and earth and fire. Part 7. The Dunlendings and the Contested Land. During the centuries when Isengard stood empty, the lands around the fortress were not empty. The Dunlendings, the indigenous people of the Western Valley, the people who had been there before Gondor and before Rohan, the Dunlendings moved into the Gap region and eventually into Isengard itself. The Dunlending occupation of Isengard is one of the most overlooked episodes in the fortress's history, and it reveals something essential about the nature of fortresses. They attract occupants the way that empty houses attract squatters. A fortress with intact walls and a defensible position is a resource. A resource that stands unoccupied and undefended will be occupied by whoever arrives first. The Dunlendings occupied Isengard not as military engineers or strategic planners, but as refugees and settlers. The fortress was shelter. The walls were protection. The structures inside the ring were habitable. The Dunlendings used Isengard the way that medieval villagers used Roman ruins as a source of ready-made infrastructure, adapted to purposes the original builders did not intend. The Dunlending occupation changed the character of the fortress. The military installation became a settlement. The precise engineered infrastructure of the Enmenrayan design was overlaid with the organic, improvised structures of a people who were using the fortress's resources without maintaining its systems. The maintenance that the Gondorian garrison had provided the specific, professional engineering-informed upkeep that kept the fortress functioning as designed was absent, and the absence allowed the decay that eventually rendered some of the secondary structures unusable. Orthanc, however, was untouched. The Dunlendings could not enter the tower. The tower's specific quality of Memrayan construction made it resistant not only to assault, but to casual occupation. The doors may have been sealed. The stone may have been too smooth to climb. Whatever the reason, the tower stood apart from the Dunlending settlement that grew around its base, inviolate and unused. The black spire rising above the improvised structures like a sentinel watching over a camp it does not belong to. The palantir remained in the tower, unused, unseen, Waiting, the Dunlending occupation lasted until the Rohirrim arrived. When the Othid settled Calenardon and became the Riders of Rohan, the strategic significance of Isengard became apparent to the new rulers of the land. The Dunlendings were driven out, not always gently, not always just. The displacement of the Dunlendings from Isengard mirrors the larger displacement of the Dunlendings from the lands that became Rohan, a contested process, driven by strategic necessity and accompanied by the specific quality of injustice that displacement always involves. The Rohirrim did not garrison Isengard. The fortress was returned to Gondor's nominal control, still Gondor's property, still theoretically part of the Gondorian defensive system, but practically without a garrison, without a purpose, without the specific quality of military functionality that the Inmemorian builders had designed it for. Isengard stood, waited, the centuries turned, the tower watched. Part 8. The arrival of Saruman. In the year 2759 of the Third Age, the steward of Gondor, Beren, gave the keys of Orthanc to Saruman. This is the moment. The hinge. The specific point in the fortress's 3,000-year history when everything changes, when the purpose that the fortress was built for is replaced by the purpose that the new occupant will impose. The giving of the keys was a political arrangement. Beren needed someone to hold Isengard. The fortress was too important to leave empty. The strategic significance of the gap position had not diminished with Gondor's decline. But Gondor could not spare the garrison. The kingdom's military resources were stretched too thin, the demands on every border too great, the specific quality of imperial overextension that plagued the late Third Age stewards too severe to allow the commitment of troops to a distant western fortress. Saruman offered to settle at Isengard. The offer made sense. Saruman was the head of the Astari, the White Wizard, the acknowledged leader of the White Council. He was the most trusted being in the Western Alliance. His presence at Isengard would serve the strategic purpose that the fortress was designed for, the defense of the gap, the surveillance of the western approaches, the maintenance of the communication network. Beren said yes, gave the keys, transferred the fortress to the wizard's custody. The transfer was not an abdication. Beren did not give Isengard to Saruman. He gave Saruman the use of Isengard. The fortress remained Gondor's property. The arrangement was custodial, not proprietary. Saruman was a steward, not an owner. But the distinction between custody and ownership, which matters in legal theory, does not matter in practice when the custodian is more powerful than the owner. Saruman was more powerful than Beren, more powerful than any steward of Gondor, more powerful in certain respects than any being in the Western Alliance. The custodian who is more powerful than the owner is, in practice, the owner, because the legal distinction can only be enforced by power, and the power belongs to the custodian. Saruman took the keys, entered Orthanc, climbed the stairs, found the Palantir, and the fortress's history entered its final phase. Part 9. What Saruman found. Saruman did not arrive at Isengard as a conqueror. He arrived as an inheritor. And what he inherited was a 3,000-year-old military installation that had been designed by the greatest engineers of the Second Age and maintained, and then, by the declining kingdom that had inherited their work. What Saruman found was specific and remarkable. He found the ring of stone, the outer wall of Isengard, a mile in circumference, still intact, still as strong as the day it was built. The Inmemorian masonry had endured 3 millennia of weather, neglect, and the Dunlending occupation without significant degradation. The wall was as effective a defensive perimeter as it had been when the builders completed it. He found the interior structures, the buildings within the ring, the workshops and storerooms and administrative buildings that the garrison had used. These were in worse condition than the wall. The secondary structures were not built to the same standard as the primary fortification, and the centuries of neglect had taken their toll. But the foundations were sound. The infrastructure was recoverable. He found the gardens. This is a detail that most retellings miss, and it is essential. Isengard had gardens. The Enmemrian builders had included green space within the ring trees, grass, the specific quality of cultivated beauty that the Dínadain incorporated into even their military installations. The gardens were not ornamental frivolity. They were a philosophical statement. A fortress should also be a place of life. A military installation should not be merely a machine of death. The gardens said, "We build to protect, and the thing we protect includes beauty." Saruman found the gardens. They were overgrown. Centuries of neglect had allowed the cultivated plants to go wild, the specific quality of designed beauty giving way to the undirected growth of abandoned cultivation. But the gardens were there, the trees were there, the grass was there, and Saruman found the tower. Orthanc, the Black Spire, the 500-foot monolith of dark, glossy, indestructible stone, rising from the center of the ring like the axis around which the entire fortress complex was organized. Orthanc was untouched. Not merely undamaged untouched. The tower was exactly as the Enmemrian builders had left it. Not a stone out of place. Not a surface mark. The specific quality of Enmemrian craftsmanship that had produced the tower had also preserved it. The tower was its own maintenance. The quality of its construction so high that no external maintenance was required. Saruman climbed the tower, entered the chambers, found the palantir, and looked into it. Part 10. The Gardens. The transformation of Isengard under Saruman is one of the most symbolically potent narratives in Tolkien's mythology, and it begins with the gardens. The gardens died slowly, not overnight, not in a single act of destruction that could be identified and mourned as a specific loss. The gardens died the way that gardens die when the gardener stops caring about them, through neglect at first, then through active displacement, then through the specific, incremental, building-by-building process of replacing the living with the made. The first workshops appeared. Small, initially the specific quality of workshop that a wizard might need for the study and craft that the Astari's mission required. A forge, a laboratory, a place to work with materials, to study objects of power, to conduct the research that Saruman's particular interests demanded. The workshops were reasonable. Each individual workshop was justified by a specific purpose. This forge is necessary. This laboratory serves a function. This workspace is required for the research that the mission demands. But the workshops expanded, and as they expanded, the gardens contracted. The trees that occupied the space the workshops needed were removed. The grass that covered the ground the forges required was paved over. The cultivated beauty that the Enmemrian builders had included as a philosophical statement was replaced by the functional infrastructure that Saruman's evolving purposes required. The replacement was gradual. No single act of destruction. No dramatic moment when the gardens were explicitly sacrificed for the workshops. Just the slow, incremental, workshop-by-workshop process of replacement that converted the fortress's interior from a place of life to a place of industry. Treebeard describes what the Ents see when they look at Isengard in its final state. He has a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him. The description captures both the transformation and the mentality that produced it. The mind of metal and wields the specific quality of intelligence that sees the world as raw material for manufacturing has replaced the mind that planted gardens. The dying of the gardens is the specific. architecturally visible expression of Saruman's internal transformation. The wizard's soul is changing, and the fortress's landscape is changing with it. The gardens that the Inmenrians planted, the specific statement that beauty belongs in a fortress, that life belongs in a military installation, that the thing worth protecting includes the living those gardens are dying, because the wizard who inhabits the fortress no longer believes in what the gardens represent. The gardens die. The forges burn. The pits open, and the fortress that was designed to protect civilization begins its transformation into the fortress that will attempt to destroy it. Part 11. The pits. The pits beneath Isengard are the physical expression of the corruption at its most advanced, and they deserve specific attention because they represent something that the surface-level narrative does not adequately convey. The sheer scale of Saruman's industrial operation. Saruman dug beneath Isengard, excavated the earth within the ring of stone, created underground spaces, forges, breeding chambers, storage facilities, the specific infrastructure of large-scale military production that the Uruk-hai program required. The digging was not minor. The pits extended deep below the surface, deep enough to house the breeding operations, the forging operations, the specific quality of sustained industrial production that an army requires. The pits were Saruman's factory floor, the place where the raw materials of his war machine were processed, where the orcs were bred and the weapons were forged, and the specific, systematic, assembly line quality of military production was maintained. The pits are Saruman's most complete expression of the Maker's mentality. The surface of Isengard, the Ring of Stone, the Tower of Orthanc, the external appearance of the fortress was the product of Menrian craft. The pits beneath the surface were the product of Saruman's craft. The above-ground fortress was inherited. The underground factory was made. The contrast between the surface and the depths tells you everything about the relationship between Saruman and the fortress he inherited. The surface is Menrian, built to protect, designed with beauty, engineered to serve the defense of civilization. The depths are Saruman's, built to produce, designed without beauty, engineered to serve the specific purpose of manufacturing an army for the conquest of the West. The fortress has two layers. The visible layer, the ancient, beautiful, Menrian layer that the world can see, and the hidden layer, the industrial, ugly, Saruman-created layer that operates beneath the surface. The two layers coexist in the same physical space, and the coexistence is the architectural expression of Saruman's double identity, the white wizard on the surface, the maker of Uruk-hai in the depths. The pits produce smoke. The forges within them burn constantly, and the smoke rises from the chimneys and vents that Saruman has installed in the fortress's surface. The smoke is the first visible sign of the corruption, the first external evidence that something is happening beneath the surface that the Inmemrian builders did not intend. The smoke is visible from a great distance. The Rohirrim see it. The Ents see it. Everyone who looks toward Isengard can see the smoke rising from the fortress that was once surrounded by gardens and is now surrounded by the visible evidence of underground industry. The pits are the corruption made literal. The corruption is beneath the surface. The corruption is invisible until you look for the signs, and the signs, once you learn to read them, are unmistakable. Part 12. The Uruk-hai. The Uruk-hai of Isengard are the most visible product of the underground factory, and they represent the specific quality of Saruman's craft applied to the most terrible material, living beings. The Uruk-hai are not simply bigger orcs. They are engineered creatures, beings designed to specifications, produced through a process that Saruman developed using the ring lore he had spent centuries studying. The Uruk-hai can withstand sunlight. The Uruk-hai are disciplined. The Uruk-hai are stronger, faster, and more tactically capable than the ordinary orcs that Sauron's forces deploy. The Uruk-hai are This is the specific, disturbing quality that distinguishes them from ordinary orcs. The Uruk-hai are the products of a deliberate manufacturing process, not born in the natural sense, not raised in the cultural sense. Produced. Like weapons, like armor, like the swords and spears that the Isengard forges turn out alongside the soldiers who will carry. Saruman's treatment of the Uruk-hai as manufactured products is the Maker's mentality at its most extreme. The living beings are not treated as beings. They are treated as products, as outputs of a process, as items in an inventory, as units of military capability that have been designed and produced to serve the Maker's purpose. The Uruk-hai bear the white hand of Saruman, the mark painted or branded on their bodies, the specific visual identifier that marks them as Saruman's property, is the industrialist's stamp on his product. The mark says, "This is mine. I made this. This belongs." The mark is the ring in miniature. The ring marks its bearer. The ring claims ownership. The ring says, "This is mine." Saruman's mark on the Uruk-hai is the same gesture, the claim of ownership over a living being, expressed as a physical mark on the being's body. The Uruk-hai are produced in the pits of Isengard. They emerge from the pits the way products emerge from a factory, finished, ready for use, designed to specifications. The emergence, the specific, iconic image of the Uruk-hai being pulled from the mud, the eyes opening, the first breath of a being that was manufactured rather than born, this emergence, is one of the most disturbing images in the mythology. The image disturbs because it inverts the normal relationship between creation and birth. Birth is natural. Birth produces a being with its own identity, its own potential, its own capacity for independent existence. Manufacturing produces a product, a thing designed to serve a purpose, a thing whose identity is defined by the function it was created to fulfill. The Uruk-hai are manufactured beings. Their identity is their function. Their purpose is their design. The specific, individual, irreplaceable quality of being this person that natural birth produces is absent in the manufactured being, replaced by the specific, generic, replaceable quality of being this unit that manufacturing produces. Isengard produces Uruk-hai the way a factory produces weapons. And the production, the systematic, scale. Industrial quality of the process is the complete expression of what Saruman has done to the fortress. The place that was built to protect civilization is now producing the instruments of civilization's destruction, using a process that treats living beings as raw material and finished products simultaneously. Part 13. The Palantir and Sauron's the Palantir of Orthanc, the seeing stone that the Inmemorians placed in the tower 3,000 years ago, is the instrument through which Sauron reaches Saruman's mind. And the instrument's history is the history of a tool turned against its purpose. The Palantri were communication devices. They were designed for legitimate use for the coordination of governance across the vast distances of the Dnedain kingdoms. The stones were tools of administration, not weapons of corruption. Their purpose was to connect, to inform, to allow the holders of the stones to share information and coordinate action. Sauron acquired one of the Palantri, the Ithil stone, taken when Minas Ithil fell to the Nazgul. And Sauron's possession of one stone gave him access to the network. The network that was designed for legitimate communication became, through Sauron's possession of a single node, a channel for the Dark Lord's influence. When Saruman looked into the Orthanc stone, Sauron was looking back. The communication that the stone enabled was genuine communication. The stone did not lie, did not distort, did not manufacture false images. The stone showed what was there. And what was there, on the other end of the connection, was Sauron. The specific quality of the Palantir's corruption is the quality of selective truth. Sauron showed Saruman real things, real armies, real fortifications, real evidence of Mordor's growing strength. The things Sauron showed were not lies. They were carefully selected truths that, taken together, painted a picture that supported the conclusion Sauron wanted Saruman to reach. The Palantir did not corrupt Saruman. The Palantir was the channel through which the corruption flowed. The distinction matters because the distinction is the history of the tool, the history of an instrument that was designed for one purpose and used for another. The Tower of Orthanc, the Menrayan Watchtower, designed for surveillance and communication, became the instrument of Saruman's contact with Sauron. The Seeing Stone that was placed in the tower to connect the Western Fortress to the defensive network became the channel through which the Dark Lord's influence entered the Western defense and corrupted it from within. The irony is architectural. The tower that was designed to watch for the enemy became the tower through which the enemy watches. The fortress that was built to defend against the shadow became the fortress through which the shadow enters. The Palantir that was placed in Orthanc to serve the defense of the West became the instrument through which the defense of the West was compromised. Part 14. The Fortress as a Mirror. Isengard under Saruman becomes a mirror, and the thing it mirrors is the relationship between the Maker and the Made. Saruman, whose fundamental character was shaped in the household of Ol the Vala of Craft, the divine Maker, the being whose orientation toward the world was the Maker's orientation of I understand, and therefore I can shape Saruman, found in Isengard the perfect canvas for his identity. The fortress was already made, already shaped, already the product of craft and Menrayan craft, the highest human craft ever achieved. The fortress was a masterwork, and the masterwork attracted the master. But the Maker's relationship with an inherited masterwork is complicated. The Maker did not make it. The Maker inherits it. And the inheritor, who is also a Maker, cannot simply appreciate the inheritance. The inheritor must modify it, must improve it, must put his own mark on the work, because the Maker's identity requires the making, and inheriting without modifying is not making. Saruman modified Isengard the way a new owner modifies an inherited house, room by room, feature by feature, converting the inherited design to serve the inheritor's purposes. The gardens were removed because the gardens did not serve Saruman's purposes. The pits were dug because the pits served Saruman's purposes. The forges were built because the forges served Saruman's purposes. Each modification was the Maker's identity asserting itself against the inherited design. Each change said, "This is mine now. I am the Maker." The previous Maker's design is the raw material for my design. The Menrayan masterwork is the foundation on which I will build my masterwork. Orthanc, however, resisted modification. The tower could not be changed. The Menrayan craft that produced the tower had produced something that transcended the modifier's capability, something so thoroughly made, so completely finished, so perfectly realized that no subsequent maker could improve it or alter it. Saruman could not modify Orthanc, could only inhabit it. And the inhabiting the occupation of a space that the occupant cannot change is the specific frustration of the Maker who encounters a made thing that is beyond his capability to remake. Orthanc is the one thing in Isengard that outlasts Saruman's modifications. The gardens are destroyed, the pits are flooded, the forges are drowned. But the tower stands unchanged, unmodified, untouched by the catastrophe that destroys everything Saruman built around it. The Menrayan making outlasts the wizard's making. The original craft outlasts the modifier's craft. The tower, standing amid the ruins of Saruman's modifications, is the architectural expression of the relationship between true craft and imitative craft. The true craft, the Emenrean craft that built to last, that built with beauty, that built to serve a purpose larger than the builder that craft endures. The imitative craft, Saruman's craft, that built to serve the builder's own purpose, that built without beauty, that built to control rather than to protect, that craft is destroyed. The tower stands, the pits flood, the maker's modifications are undone, and the original making patient, beautiful, purpose-aligned remains. Part 15. Gandalf imprisoned. The imprisonment of Gandalf on the pinnacle of Orthanc is one of the most iconic scenes in The Lord of the Rings, and it tells you everything about the relationship between Saruman and his fortress. Gandalf comes to Isengard. Comes at Saruman's invitation, the specific, deliberately crafted invitation that is designed to lure Gandalf to a confrontation that Saruman has been preparing for. Gandalf comes because Saruman is his chief, the head of his order, the wizard whose authority Gandalf has respected for 2,000 years. Saruman reveals his hand, offers Gandalf partnership. Together we can rule this Middle-earth. The offer is genuine. Saruman genuinely wants Gandalf's alliance, genuinely believes that the two greatest wizards working together could achieve what neither could achieve alone. Gandalf refuses. And the refusal triggers the imprisonment. Gandalf is taken to the pinnacle of Orthanc, the flat summit of the 500-foot tower, the exposed, wind-swept, escape-proof platform at the top of the indestructible spire. The imprisonment is the fortress used as a cage. The specific quality of Orthanc's construction, the smoothness of the stone, the height of the tower, the impossibility of climbing down, makes the pinnacle the most effective prison in Middle-earth. The prison that the Emenrians built as a watchtower. The observation platform that becomes an exposure platform. The highest point in the fortress, designed to give the watcher the widest possible view, repurposed to give the prisoner the most torturous possible awareness of his own helplessness. Gandalf on Orthanc's pinnacle can see everything. Can see the misty mountains, can see the Gap of Rohan, can see the lands that the fortress was designed to protect, and that the fortress's current occupant is preparing to attack. The view that was designed to serve surveillance now serves. Torment the prisoner can see the world he needs to save and cannot reach it. The imprisonment is also a display of power. Saruman puts Gandalf on the pinnacle because the pinnacle is visible. Anyone looking at Orthanc, any rider crossing the gap, any eagle flying overhead can see the figure on top of the tower. The prisoner is displayed. The imprisonment is a statement. I am stronger. I have taken the Grey Wizard and placed him where he cannot act. Look at my power. The display backfires. Gwaihir the Windlord, the Great Eagle, flying on an errand from Radagast, sees Gandalf on the pinnacle. The visibility that Saruman intended as a display of power becomes the mechanism of Gandalf's rescue. The eagle descends. Gandalf escapes. The rescue is one of the most important events in the history of the War of the Ring, and it is enabled by the fortress's own design. The tower's height, which Saruman used to imprison Gandalf, is the quality that makes the rescue possible. The eagle can see Gandalf because Gandalf is on the tallest structure in the region. The prison is visible because the prison and the visibility, which was designed to serve surveillance and which Saruman repurposed to serve display, serves rescue instead. The chain of repurposings runs through the entire event. The tower was designed for watching. Saruman used it for imprisoning. The imprisonment's visibility enabled the rescue. The watching tower became the prison tower, became the rescue platform. 3 different purposes, served by the same architectural feature, in the space of a few days. This chain is the Isengard story in miniature. The same structure serves different purposes because different wills use it. The tower does not change. The purposes change. And the changing purposes produce the ironic consequences that run through the entire history The thing designed for one purpose serves the opposite purpose, because the will that directs it has changed. Gandalf's escape from Orthanc is the pivot of the War of the Ring. Without the escape, Gandalf does not reach the Shire in time. Without reaching the Shire, Gandalf does not identify the ring. Without identifying the ring, the quest does not begin. The entire chain of events that leads from the Shire to Mount Doom begins with an eagle seeing a wizard on a tower, seeing the prisoner because the prison is high, reaching the prisoner because the prison is exposed, rescuing the prisoner because the prison's own design makes the rescue possible. Isengard, designed to defend the West, imprisons the wizard who will save the West. And Isengard's own design, the height, the visibility, the specific quality of the tower's architecture, enables the rescue that the imprisonment was designed to prevent. The fortress works against its occupant's purpose. Not through rebellion, the fortress has no will. Through the specific, ironic quality of well-designed structures, the design serves purposes beyond the current occupant's intention, and the unintended purposes are sometimes more consequential than the intended ones. The fortress that Saruman uses to imprison Gandalf is the fortress that makes Gandalf's rescue possible. The tower that was designed for surveillance enables the rescue because the surveillance design makes the prisoner visible. And the visibility, the specific, architectural design embedded quality of being able to be seen, saves the world. The Enmenrian engineers who designed Orthanc's height for surveillance could not have imagined that the height would one day enable the rescue of a wizard who would set in motion the chain of events that would destroy the Dark Lord. But the design served that purpose, because the design was good, because the design was built for endurance and visibility, and the specific quality of seeing and being seen that the watchtower function requires. Good design serves purposes the designer did not intend. This is the lesson of Gandalf's escape from Orthanc, and the lesson is the Isengard lesson writ small. The made thing outlasts the maker's purpose, and serves purposes the maker could not foresee. Part 16. Isengard prepares for war. The transformation of Isengard from a fortress into a war machine is a process that takes decades, and the process reveals the specific quality of Saruman's intelligence, systematic, thorough, and fundamentally oriented toward the control of material and the production of force. The preparation has several dimensions: the military dimension, the breeding of the Uruk-hai, the forging of weapons and armor, the creation of the military capability that Saruman intends to deploy against Rohan, and eventually against Gondor. The pits produce soldiers. The forges produce weapons. The combination produces an army, not a raiding party, not a warband, but a fully equipped, logistically sustained, operationally capable army. The industrial dimension. The creation of the manufacturing infrastructure that supports the military production. The forges need fuel. Saruman strips the surrounding forests for timber, feeding the trees to the furnaces that produce the weapons that arm the soldiers. The pits need food. Saruman establishes supply lines from the surrounding lands, feeding the breeding operation that produces the soldiers. The entire fortress becomes a production system, with inputs, ore, and outputs, olgers, weapons, ordnance. The intelligence dimension, the network of agents and informants that Saruman deploys across the Western lands. The Shire intelligence operation. The Dunlending contacts. The Wormtongue operation in Rohan. The spies and scouts and the specific quality of human intelligence infrastructure that a sophisticated military operation requires. The diplomatic dimension. The alliances and relationships that Saruman maintains with his potential allies and targets. The relationship with Sauron through the Palantir. The relationship with the Dunlendings through the exploitation of their grievance. The relationship with Rohan through the Wormtongue operation. All of these dimensions converge at Isengard. The fortress is the hub, the central node in a network of military, industrial, intelligence, and diplomatic operations that extends across Western Middle-earth. Isengard is not simply a fortress. It is a system, a complex, multidimensional, operationally integrated system that converts inputs into military capability and deploys that capability according to the strategic design of the system's creator. The system is impressive. The system is the product of an extraordinary intelligence applied with extraordinary diligence to the specific task of converting a fortress into a war machine. The system would be admirable if it were not evil, if the intelligence that designed it were directed toward defense rather than aggression, toward protection rather than domination. But the intelligence is directed toward domination. And the system's impressiveness is the system's horror, because the more effective the system, the more damage it will do. The quality of the intelligence multiplies the quantity of the harm. 10,000 Uruk-hai march from Isengard to Helm's Deep. 10,000 soldiers, fully equipped, logistically sustained, tactically coordinated. The product of the system, the output of the machine. The fortress's answer to the question that Saruman has been asking for decades. What can I make from this place? Saruman can make an army. Saruman can make the instruments of war. Saruman can make the specific, military quality of force that the Maker's intelligence produces when it is directed toward destruction. The fortress that was built to protect has become the factory that produces the instruments of aggression. The transformation is complete. The purpose is inverted. The thing is now the opposite of what the thing was designed to be. Part 17. The Dam and the River. There is a detail about Isengard's transformation that most people miss, and it is one of the most symbolically significant details in the entire story. Saruman dammed the river. The river Isen flows through the Gap of Rohan, and its headwaters rise near Isengard. The river was part of the fortress's original design. The Inmemorian engineers incorporated the water flow into the fortress's infrastructure, using the river for supply, and for the specific quality of hydraulic engineering that the Inmemorians excelled at. Saruman dammed the Isen, diverted the water, used the river's flow to power his machinery. The forges, the bellows, the specific quality of water powered industrial production that converts natural energy into manufacturing capability. The damming of the river is the specific, physical act that converts a natural resource from a natural function to an industrial function. The river, which was flowing according to its own nature, which was doing what rivers do, following the path that gravity and geology had determined, was redirected, captured, controlled, made to serve the specific purpose that the controller determined, rather than the purpose that the river's own nature would have followed. The river is the natural world, captured and enslaved. The dam is the Maker's will, imposed on the natural flow. The industrial machinery that the river powers is the product of the enslaved nature, the specific output that the controlled resource produces. The Ents release the river. When the Ents destroy Isengard, they break the dam. The river, freed from the dam's control, flows back to its natural course and floods the pits. The water that Saruman captured and controlled is the water that destroys his industrial operation. The natural resource that was enslaved is the natural resource that, once freed, undoes the enslavement's products. The flooding of Isengard is the river's revenge. Not consciously, the river does not have consciousness or purpose, but the narrative treats the flooding as a specific, justice-fulfilling act. The nature that was controlled reasserts itself and destroys the products of the control. The dam and its breaking are the Isengard story in miniature. The natural thing, captured and controlled, redirected from its natural purpose to serve the Maker's purpose. And then the natural thing, released from control, flowing back to its natural course and destroying the artificial structures that the control had built. Part 18. The Ents. The Ents' assault on Isengard is one of the most cathartic moments in The Lord of the Rings, and it is cathartic precisely because the assault is the answer to everything that Saruman has done to the fortress and the land around. Part 18b. What Treebeard sees. Treebeard's perspective on Isengard is the natural world's perspective, and it deserves specific attention because Treebeard sees things that the other characters cannot see. Treebeard is old. Older than the elves. Older than Isengard. Treebeard remembers when the lands that became the Gap of Rohan were forested when the specific, open, grassland landscape that the Rohirrim inhabit was a different landscape entirely. Treebeard remembers the forest before the fortress. When Treebeard looks at Isengard, he sees the violation in its full historical context. He sees not just the current damage, the pits, the forges, the smoke, but the accumulated damage of 3,000 years of human modification. The Inmenrian construction itself was a modification, the replacement of natural landscape with engineered landscape, the specific act of converting forest or grassland into stone wall and tower. Treebeard does not necessarily condemn the Inmenrian construction. The Ents' relationship with the Dunedain was not hostile. The Ents and the elves were allies, and the Dunedain were the elves' friends. But Treebeard sees the construction as what it is, a making. A conversion of the natural into the artificial, a replacement of the grown with the built. Saruman's modifications are different. The Numenorian construction replaced natural landscape with built landscape, but included gardens maintained the principle that the built landscape should contain the natural. Saruman's modifications eliminate the natural entirely. The gardens die, the trees are cut, the forest is stripped for fuel. The principle of coexistence between the built and the grown is abandoned. Treebeard's famous description, he has a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him, is the Ents' diagnosis. The mind of metal and wheels is the maker's mind operating without the gardener's counterbalance, the specific quality of intelligence that sees the world as material to be processed, without the companion quality that sees the world as life to be tended. The diagnosis is precise because Treebeard can see both the absence and what should fill it. The Ent, who has spent thousands of years tending growing things, can identify the specific quality that is missing from Saruman's operation. The care for growing things. Not the knowledge of growing things Saruman knows about plants and trees and the natural world. The care for growing things, the specific, irreducible, non-analytical quality of attending to the living world for its own sake, rather than for the sake of what it can produce. Knowledge without care is Saruman's fundamental problem. And the problem, expressed architecturally in the fortress's transformation, is visible to Treebeard in a way that it is not visible to the other characters. Because Treebeard is the being whose entire existence is organized around the specific quality of care that Saruman's operation lacks. Part 18c. The Entmoot and the Decision. The Entmoot, the gathering of the Ents at which the decision to attack Isengard is made, is itself a significant event in the fortress's history. Because the Entmoot is the natural world's deliberative process applied to the question of what to do about the industrial world's violation. The Entmoot takes time. Days. The hobbits are frantic, the hobbits, who operate on a mortal timescale, who feel the urgency of the war, who know that every day of delay is a day that the enemy grows stronger. The Ents deliberate. The Ents consider. The Ents take the time that the decision requires. The Ents' timescale is the natural timescale. The deliberation takes the time it takes because the natural world does not hurry. The trees do not rush. The forest does not operate on deadlines. The specific quality of patient, thorough, unhurried consideration that the Entmoot displays is the quality of the natural world applied to the question of action. The decision, when it comes, is final. The Ents do not make tentative decisions. The Ents do not experiment. The Ents decide, and the decision is enacted with the full force of the natural world's accumulated power. The march on Isengard is not a raid. It is a geological event, the ancient, deep, root-powered force of the forest, finally directed at the industrial complex that has been violating the forest for decades. The Entmoot's decision transforms the fortress's history. The fortress has survived empires and occupations and abandonment. The fortress has not previously been attacked by the natural world itself. The Ents' assault is the first time in the fortress's 3,000-year history that the fundamental distinction between the made and the grown, the distinction that the fortress's existence embodies, is challenged by the grown world's direct action against the made world's product. The Ents do not attack Isengard because Isengard is a fortress. The Ents attack because Isengard's occupant has attacked the forest. The distinction matters. The Ents are not opposed to fortresses. The Ents are opposed to the specific violation that this fortress's occupant has committed against the natural world. The fortress is the target because the fortress is the base of the violator's operation, not because the fortress is inherently offensive. This precision, the precision of the natural world's response, directed at the specific violation rather than at the general category, is the quality that makes the Ents' assault justice rather than revenge. The Ents destroy the violation. The Ents do not destroy the fortress. The distinction is maintained throughout the assault. The Saruman made things are destroyed. The Nummenrian made things are preserved. Part 18d. The sound of Isengard's destruction. The sound of the Ents destroying Isengard is one of the most underappreciated details in the mythology, and it deserves mention because sound is the medium through which destruction is first perceived. The sound carries across the Riddim. The Rohirrim, fighting at Helm's Deep, cannot hear it. The distance is too great, and the battle is too loud. But the sound exists. The specific acoustic quality of ancient trees tearing apart stone walls, of water rushing through broken dams, of industrial machinery being crushed by root-powered force. This sound is the voice of the natural world's anger, expressed in the specific medium of physical destruction. The sound is different from battle sound. Battle sound is metal on metal, voices screaming, the specific acoustic signature of mortal combat between beings of comparable size and capability. The sound of the Ents destroying Isengard is something else, the deep, grinding, geological sound of enormous force, applied slowly and irresistibly to structures that were designed to withstand any force except the force being applied. The walls crack, the stones grind, the water roars, the forges hiss as the flood reaches them. The specific, layered, multi-textured sound of a fortress being systematically dismantled by the oldest beings in the world. This sound is the mythology's acoustic expression of the confrontation between the natural and the artificial. Merry and Pippin hear it. The hobbits, who are present at the destruction, hear the full symphony of the Ents' assault, hear the trees walking, hear the stones breaking, hear the water rushing into the spaces that the fire had occupied. The hobbit's perspective on the destruction is the mortal perspective, the specific quality of witnessing something that is larger than your comprehension, older than your experience, more powerful than anything you have encountered. The sound stays with the hobbits. The memory of the sound, the specific, overwhelming nature, powered destruction of the most dangerous fortress in western Middle-earth, the memory becomes part of the hobbit's story, part of the tale they will tell when they return to the Shire, part of the wider narrative that connects the destruction of Isengard to the scouring of the Shire, and the restoration of the natural world in both locations. The Ents are the natural world's response to the industrial violation. The tree shepherds the ancient beings who have watched over the forests since before the elves awakened, who have been patient, slow, reluctant to act. Reluctant to involve themselves in the wars of the shorter-lived peoples, the Ents finally move. Finally act. Finally bring the specific quality of ancient, slow, accumulated power against the specific quality of modern, fast, manufactured force that Saruman represents. The Ents come from Fangorn, from the forest on Isengard's northern border, the forest that the Rohirrim fear, the forest that Saruman's lumbering operations have been stripping for fuel. The Ents come because Saruman has attacked the forest, has cut the trees, has fed the living forest to the forges that produce the instruments of death. The Ents' motivation is not political. The Ents do not care about the War of the Ring, do not care about Rohan or Gondor, or the strategic balance of Western Middle-earth. The Ents care about the trees that Saruman is cutting, the trees that Saruman is burning, the specific, living, ancient trees that the Ents have been shepherding for thousands of years and that Saruman's industrial operation is consuming as raw material. Merry and Pippin serve as the catalysts. The two hobbits, who have been carried to Fangorn by the escape from the Uruk-hai, encounter Treebeard and tell him what they have seen: the destruction. The specific quality of systematic violation that Saruman's operation represents. The Entmoot decides. The Ents deliberate slowly, carefully, with a specific quality of ancient patience that makes the Ents seem impossibly slow to the hobbits who are waiting for the decision. The deliberation takes days. The hobbits are frantic. The Ents are thorough. And then, the Ents march. The March of the Ents is the most visually spectacular event in the War of the Ring that does not involve a cavalry charge. The ancient beings walking through the forest, their footsteps shaking the earth, their voices calling to each other in a language that is older than the mountains. Hundreds of them. Beings that have been still for centuries, finally in motion. The forest, walking, the Ents reach Isengard, and the Ents begin to break it. The breaking is systematic. The Ents do not simply attack, they dismantle. They pull down the walls, they tear apart the workshops, they rip open the pits. The specific industrial infrastructure that Saruman spent decades building is systematically destroyed by beings whose mode of destruction is as patient and thorough as Saruman's mode of construction. The walls fall, the workshops shatter, the forges are exposed, the pits are opened. The specific, layered, carefully constructed industrial complex that Saruman built within the ring of Isengard is peeled apart, layer by layer, structure by structure, until nothing remains except the ring of stone, the original Memrian wall, which the Ents cannot break, and the Tower of Orthanc, which the Ents cannot scratch. The Ents break the dam. The river floods the interior. The water fills the pits. The forges drown. The specific fire and metal quality of Saruman's industrial operation is extinguished by the water that Saruman had captured and controlled, and that is now free to follow its natural course. Isengard is destroyed. Not the fortress is Memrine, and Memrian work endures. Saruman's modifications are destroyed. The gardens that Saruman killed are replaced by a lake. The workshops that Saruman built are rubble. The pits that Saruman dug are flooded. The specific quality of industrial violation that Saruman imposed on the fortress's original design is washed away by the water and broken by the trees. The Ents have returned Isengard to something approaching its original condition: a ring of stone, a tower, and water where the gardens used to be. Part 19. Orthanc after the flood. After the Ents assault, Isengard presents a specific and remarkable visual. The ring of stone, intact, surrounding a lake where the interior used to be, with the Tower of Orthanc rising from the water like a dark, monolithic island. The image is arresting. The fortress that was full of industry, full of forges, workshops, breeding pits, the entire apparatus of Saruman's war machine is now full of water. The specific, noisy, firelit quality of the industrial Isengard has been replaced by the specific, quiet, water-reflective quality of the flooded Isengard. Saruman is still in the tower. The wizard who commanded an army, who manufactured 10,000 Uruk-hai, who operated the most sophisticated military-industrial complex in Middle-earth, that wizard is now trapped in his tower, surrounded by water, with no army, no forges, no pits, no agents, no capability except the voice and the palantir. The tower that Saruman cannot modify is now the tower that Saruman cannot. Orthanc, which was the center of Saruman's power, has become the prison that contains Saruman's impotence. The indestructible tower that resisted the Ents' assault also resists Saruman's escape. The same quality of impregnability that protects the tower's occupant also confines the tower's occupant. The irony is architectural, and it is precise. Saruman is imprisoned in the one structure that his own modifications did not touch. Everything Saruman built has been destroyed. The one thing that survives the original Menrian work, the tower that predates the wizard by 3,000 years, is the thing that imprisons him. Saruman's imprisonment in Orthanc is the inverse of Gandalf's imprisonment on Orthanc. Gandalf was placed on the pinnacle exposed, visible, unable to descend. Saruman is trapped inside the tower, concealed, invisible, unable to emerge. The tower serves as a prison for both wizards, but the quality of the imprisonment is different. Gandalf was displayed. Saruman is confined. The water around the tower is the specific physical barrier that completes the imprisonment. The Ents maintain the flooding. The water prevents approach. The tower, which was designed to stand alone, designed as a monolith, an individual structure independent of the surrounding complex, the tower now stands literally alone, surrounded by the water that fills the space where the complex used to be. Saruman, in Orthanc, looking out over the flooded ruins of everything he built. The forges are drowned. The pits are flooded. The army is destroyed. The workshops are rubble. The gardens that the Menrians planted and that Saruman killed are replaced by a lake that reflects the sky. The wizard in the tower, surrounded by water, watching the ruin of his work. Part 20. The Voice of Saruman. The chapter that Tolkien titles The Voice of Saruman is the last scene in which Isengard functions as a dramatic location, and it is one of the most psychologically devastating chapters in the entire Lord of the Rings. Théoden, Gandalf, Aragorn, and the Fellowship arrive at the flooded Isengard. They look up at Orthanc. Saruman appears on the balcony. And Saruman speaks. The voice, the weapon we have discussed in another context. The specific quality of persuasion that uses the listener's own values as the pathway to the wrong conclusion. The voice operates from the balcony of the tower. The tower amplifies the voice. The specific architectural quality of Orthanc, the height, the acoustics, the way the dark stone reflects and projects sound, amplifies the voice's effect. The tower was designed as a watchtower. The watchtower's height and exposure, which served surveillance, now serve persuasion. The elevated position that was designed to allow the watcher to see now allows the speaker to be heard. Saruman, speaking from Orthanc's balcony, is using the Menrian architecture as a weapon. The tower's design, the elevation, the projection, the specific quality of the stone's acoustics serves the voice's purpose. The tower was not designed for this purpose. The tower is being used for this purpose, and the using is the last act of Saruman's repurposing of the Menrian work the last example of the wizard taking the builder's design and redirecting it to serve a purpose the builders did not intend. Gandalf breaks the spell, offers mercy. Saruman refuses. And Gandalf breaks Saruman's staff. The breaking is done from below Gandalf standing on the ground, Saruman standing on the balcony. The elevated position that gives Saruman the acoustic advantage does not give him the power advantage. The power flows upward from Gandalf on the ground to Saruman on the balcony, and the staff breaks. Grima throws the palantir. The Seeing Stone, hurled from the tower by Wormtongue in a moment of frustrated rage, falls to the ground at the feet of the Fellowship. The palantir, the 3,000-year-old Menrian artifact, the communication tool that became the corruption's channel, leaves the tower. The palantir's departure from Orthanc is the severance of the last connection between the fortress and its corrupted purpose. The stone that linked Saruman to Sauron is gone. The tower stands, but the instrument of the tower's corruption is removed. Part 20. Pippin and the Seeing Stone. Pippin's encounter with the palantir is one of the most consequential moments in the entire War of the Ring, and it happens in the ruins of Isengard in the flooded, destroyed, Ent-guarded wreckage of Saruman's fortress. Pippin picks up the palantir because Pippin is curious. The Hobbit's curiosity, the specific, irrepressible Hobbit quality of wanting to know what a thing is and what a thing does, drives Pippin to look into the stone despite knowing that the stone is dangerous. Despite knowing that Gandalf has taken custody of the stone. Despite knowing that the thing in his hands is the instrument through which the most dangerous wizard in Middle-earth communicated with the Dark Lord. Pippin looks, and Sauron looks back. The encounter is devastating. Pippin, the youngest member of the Fellowship, the most innocent, the most unprepared for the specific quality of direct contact with ultimate evil Pippin, is suddenly face to face with the eye of Sauron. The Dark Lord's will presses against the Hobbit's consciousness. The eye searches. The eye demands. The eye attempts to extract information from the terrified halfling who has, by accident and curiosity, connected himself to the most dangerous communications network in Middle-earth. Pippin survives the encounter because Pippin has nothing to tell. The Hobbit does not know where the ring is, does not know the plan, does not have the specific information that Sauron is searching for. The Hobbit's ignorance is his protection. The eye finds nothing, because there is nothing to find. But the encounter produces consequences. Sauron now believes that the Hobbit is being held at Isengard, that Saruman has the Hobbit, that Saruman may have the ring, that the wizard who was supposed to be an ally has been concealing a ring bearer. Sauron's misunderstanding accelerates his attack on Gondor, drives the Dark Lord to launch the assault on Minas Tirith sooner than planned, in the belief that the ring may be moving west through the Gap rather than east toward Mordor. The palantir, leaving Isengard, produces the specific chain of consequences that reshapes the war's time. The stone that was placed in Orthanc by Menrian engineers 3,000 years ago, the stone that connected the fortress to the defensive network, that was corrupted by Sauron's contact, that was used by Saruman for treachery. That stone, thrown from the tower by a frustrated servant, picked up by a curious hobbit, produces the misunderstanding that accelerates the war's climax. The stone does not change. The stone is the same stone. But the chain of users, Menrian engineers, Gondorian commanders, Saruman the corrupted wizard, Pippin the curious hobbit, the chain of users produces a chain of consequences that the original users could not have imagined. Part 20c. What Thodin sees at Isengard. When Thodin arrives at the flooded Isengard, when the king of Rohan rides through the ruins of the fortress that has been the source of his kingdom's greatest threat, the king sees something that the other members of the company do not fully appreciate: the scale. Thodin has been fighting Saruman's army, has seen the Uruk-hai at Helm's Deep, has felt the military capability that Isengard produced. But the military capability was the output. Isengard was the factory. And the factory is larger, more complex, more thoroughly designed than the output suggested. The king sees the pits flooded now, but visible beneath the water. The king sees the forges drowned, but their chimneys still protruding above the waterline. The king sees the ring of stone, the mile-wide circle that enclosed the entire operation. And the king understands, in a way that the battle at Helm's Deep did not fully convey, the scale of the threat that was directed against his kingdom. The 10,000 Uruk-hai that attacked Helm's Deep were a fraction of what Isengard could produce. The fortress's industrial capability, even destroyed, even flooded, even visible only in ruins, reveals that Saruman's ambition was larger than a single battle. The fortress was designed to produce armies, not an army. The capacity was ongoing, not one time. Thodun's reaction is not recorded in detail, but the silence is eloquent. The king, who has just fought the most desperate battle of his reign, rides into the ruins of the enemy's base and sees that the battle he fought was the first battle, not the last. The enemy had the capability to produce more soldiers, more weapons, more of the specific, industrial, scaled quality of military production that made the Uruk-hai different from ordinary orcs. The Ents' destruction of Isengard did not merely win the battle at Helm's Deep retroactively. The destruction prevented the next battle, and the next after that. The Ents destroyed not just the army that marched, but the factory that could have produced more armies. The destruction was strategic, not tactical, the elimination of the capability, not just the current output. Thodun sees this, understands this, and the understanding deepens the king's appreciation of the Ents' contribution of the specific, devastating, war-changing quality of what the tree shepherds accomplished when they walked to Isengard and tore it apart. Part 20D, the fortress between fire and water. The elemental symbolism of Isengard's story is built on the opposition between fire and water, and the opposition runs through the entire narrative. Fire is Saruman's element. The forges burn, the furnaces blaze. The specific, industrial, production-oriented quality of fire as a tool, fire as energy, fire as the mechanism that converts raw material into finished product. This quality of fire is the specific quality that Saruman's operation requires and deploys. Water is the Ents element. The river flows. The flood rises. The specific, natural, uncontrollable quality of water as a force that follows its own course. Water as a power that cannot be directed, but only contained or released. This quality of water is the specific quality that the Ents deploy against Saruman's fire. Fire transforms. Water erases. Fire converts raw material into manufactured product. Water dissolves the manufactured product back into raw material. The two elements are the two poles of the making-unmaking dialectic that runs through the entire Isengard narrative. Saruman's fire is controlled fire. Fire in forges. Fire in furnaces. Fire directed by the specific quality of engineered containment that allows the fire to produce useful work rather than random destruction. The controlled fire is the maker's fire, the fire that serves the maker's purpose, that converts the maker's inputs into the maker's outputs. The Ents' water is uncontrolled water. Water released from a dam. Water following gravity. Water filling the spaces that the fire occupied, drowning the forges, extinguishing the furnaces, flooding the pits. The uncontrolled water is the natural force that does not serve any purpose, that follows its own nature, that goes where gravity takes it, that does what water does without reference to any maker's plan. The fire loses. The water wins. The controlled element is overcome by the uncontrolled element. The maker's instrument is drowned by the natural force that the maker tried to harness. The symbolism extends beyond Isengard. Throughout Tolkien's mythology, fire is associated with the making impulse Ol's forge, Fanor's craft, the Silmarils that burn with captured light. Water is associated with the divine feminine Olmo, the Vala of the sea, whose power flows through all the waters of the world, whose influence reaches places that the other Valar cannot access. Isengard's story is the story of fire and water, of the maker's element and the natural element, of control and release, of the specific quality of craft that transforms, and the specific quality of nature that dissolves. The fortress is the battlefield where the two elements meet, and the outcome, the water winning, the fire losing, the natural force overcoming the controlled force, is the mythology's specific statement about the relationship between the two. Pippin picks up the Palantir, looks into it, and the chain of consequences that follows the contact with Sauron, the ride to Minas Tirith, the specific sequence of events that places Pippin in the White City in time to light the beacons that chain begins here, in the ruins of Isengard, with the Palantir leaving the tower that housed it for 3,000 years. Part 21. Merry and Pippin at the gate. The hobbits sitting amid the ruins of Isengard, Merry and Pippin, eating and smoking and greeting Thodun's company with the specific, absurd, hobbit quality of casual hospitality in the wreckage of a conquered fortress. This scene is one of the most tonally complex in the entire Lord of the Rings. The scene is funny. Deliberately, intentionally, structurally funny. Two hobbits, sitting on the rubble of a destroyed war machine, eating salted pork and smoking pipeweed, greeting the heroes of Helm's Deep with the cheerful nonchalance of hosts welcoming expected guests. The humour is the contrast. The contrast between what Isengard was the most dangerous military-industrial complex in Western Middle-earth and what Isengard is now a flooded ruin where two hobbits are having lunch. The contrast between the scale of the destruction that the Ents accomplished and the scale of the hobbits' response, a meal. The grandest military facility Saruman could build, reduced to a picnic site. The humour serves a deeper purpose. It humanizes the victory. The destruction of Isengard is accomplished by the Ents, by beings of ancient, superhuman power, who operate on a timescale that makes the hobbit's life rhythm seem frantic. The Ents' victory is impressive but inhuman. The hobbit's picnic is unimpressive but profoundly human. The combination, the inhuman victory and the human response to it, captures the specific quality of the Lord of the Rings treatment of war. The great things happen because the small things matter. And the small things, a meal, a pipe, the pleasure of reunion, are the specific quality of living that the great things are meant to protect. Merry and Pippin at the gates of Isengard are the answer to Saruman's vision. Saruman saw the world as material to be processed. The hobbits see the world as a place to have lunch. Saruman's vision produced an army. The hobbit's vision produces a moment of happiness amid the ruins of the army's base. The ruins are the background to the meal. The meal is in the foreground, and the relative positioning the human thing in front, the ruined machine behind, is the narrative statement about what matters and what does not. Part 22. The departure of Saruman. Saruman leaves Orthanc. Not voluntarily at first, the Ents maintain the imprisonment for months after the war's end. But eventually, after the ring is destroyed and the war is over, Treebeard releases Saruman, lets the wizard go. The release is an act of mercy. Not justice would keep the wizard imprisoned for his crimes. Mercy, which operates on a different calculus from justice, lets the wizard go because the wizard is diminished, and the Ent does not wish to be a jailer forever. Saruman leaves Isengard, walks away from the fortress that was his domain for 250 years. Walks away from the tower he could not modify, and the pits he dug, and the gardens he killed, and the ring of stone that he occupied but never owned. The departure is the final separation of the wizard from the fortress. For 2.5 centuries, Saruman and Isengard were synonymous. The wizard was the fortress. The fortress was the wizard. The wizard's identity was expressed in the fortress's transformation. The fortress's condition was the expression of the wizard's state. Now the wizard leaves, and the fortress remains. The departure reveals the truth that the synonymity concealed. The fortress is not the wizard. The fortress is the fortress. The fortress existed before the wizard, and will exist after the wizard. The fortress's identity, its memory and identity, its designed purpose, its specific quality of enduring construction, is not dependent on the wizard's presence. Saruman diminished, staff broken, Palantir gone, army destroyed. Voice weakened, walks away from the indestructible tower that served him, and then imprisoned him. The wizard who once commanded from the tower's balcony now passes through the gate on foot, a broken figure, with only Germa as his companion. Isengard watches him go. The tower stands. The ring of stone stands. The water fills the pits. The fortress, emptied of the wizard's presence, returns to the condition it occupied before the wizard arrived, a military installation without a garrison, a watchtower without a watcher, a fortress without a purpose. The fortress waits. It has waited before. It will wait again. 3,000 years of memory and engineering have given the fortress the patience that mortal purposes lack. Part 23. Isengard restored. After the War of the Ring, Isengard is restored. Not to its industrial state. The Ent's destruction was thorough, and the industrial modifications are gone permanently, but to something approaching the fortress's original condition. The Ents plant trees. Treebeard and the other Ents, having destroyed the industrial operation that was violating the surrounding forest, begin the process of reforestation, planting trees within the ring of Isengard, converting the flooded industrial wasteland into what Treebeard calls a garden. The garden is the Ents' answer to Saruman's industry. Where Saruman built forges, the Ents plant trees. Where Saruman dug pits, the Ents create pools. Where Saruman's vision produced fire and metal, and the specific quality of manufacturing that treats the world as raw material. The Ent's vision produces growth and water, and the specific quality of cultivation that treats the world as a living thing to be tended. The Ent's garden is not the Enmenrian garden. The Enmenrian gardens were cultivated, designed, planned, maintained according to a specific aesthetic vision. The Ent's garden is more natural, closer to a managed forest than to a formal garden, organized according to the Ent's specific understanding of what a healthy ecosystem looks like, rather than according to a human aesthetic preference. But the principle is the same. Life belongs inside the ring of stone. The fortress should contain growing things. The military installation should also be a place of beauty. The restoration is incomplete. The industrial damage cannot be fully undone. The scars of Saruman's modifications are present in the landscape even after the Ent's replanting. The pits, though flooded, are still pits. The ground, though replanted, bears the marks of excavation. The specific quality of violation that the industrial operation inflicted on the landscape is present as a scar, visible beneath the new growth. But the new growth is there. The trees are growing. The water is flowing. The specific quality of life that the Ents represent is reasserting itself in the space that the specific quality of industry that Saruman represented had temporarily displaced. The restoration is the mythology's statement about resilience. The natural world, violated by the industrial world, recovers, not immediately, not completely. But the recovery happens, the trees grow, the water flows, the life returns. The violation is real. The recovery is also real. And the recovery over time is stronger than the violation. Orthanc stands in the new garden, the tower unchanged, unmodified, as untouched by the Ents' restoration as it was by Saruman's modifications, stands amid the growing trees the way it stood amid the dying gardens, alone. Apart, the one thing in Isengard that does not change, regardless of what changes around it. Part 24. The Fortress and Tolkien's Theme. Isengard is Tolkien's most complete architectural expression of his central theme, the relationship between the maker and the made. The theme operates through the fortress's three phases. Phase 1. The Inmenrian construction. The builders who made the fortress with beauty, with purpose, with a specific quality of craft that serves a larger goal. The Inmenrian phase is the phase of legitimate, making the craft that serves the world rather than the craftsman. The building that protects rather than dominates. The construction that includes gardens. Because the builders understand that protection includes the protection of beauty. Phase 2. The Saruman modification. The wizard who remakes the fortress to serve himself. The gardens die. The forges burn. The pits open. The fortress is converted from a place of protection to a place of production, from a servant of civilization to a factory of its destruction. The Saruman phase is the phase of corrupted making the craft that serves the craftsman, the building that dominates rather than protects, the construction that destroys gardens because the builder no longer cares about beauty. Phase 3. The Ent restoration, the ancient beings who undo the modifications and replant the gardens. The water flows. The trees grow. The fortress is returned to something approaching its original condition, not identical, but aligned with the original purpose. The Ent phase is the phase of restored making the craft that returns the made thing to its designed purpose. The building that is healed rather than rebuilt. The construction that replants gardens because the restorers understand that the gardens were the point. The three phases construction, corruption, restoration are the three movements of Tolkien's central theme. The made thing is good. The maker who corrupts the made thing is evil. The restoration of the made thing to its designed purpose is the specific quality of healing that the mythology consistently identifies as the deepest form of goodness. The fortress endures through all three phases. The Ring of Stone. The Tower of Orthanc. The specific, physical, indestructible quality of the Inmenrian work that survives the corruption and the restoration alike, that is unchanged by either the violation or the healing, that stands as the permanent foundation on which the changing purposes of the successive occupants are built and destroyed and rebuilt. The fortress is the constant. The purposes are the variables. And the history of Isengard is the history of the variables changing while the constant endures. Part 25. What the Ring of Stone means. The Ring of Isengard, the outer wall, the mile-wide circle of stone that encloses the fortress complex, deserves specific attention because the ring is the most symbolically loaded feature of the fortress's design. The ring is a circle, a closed shape, an enclosure. The specific, geometric quality of a boundary that separates inside from outside, protected from unprotected, us from them. The in-memoriam ring was designed to protect. The enclosure was defensive, the boundary that kept the enemies out and the garrison safe. The ring of stone served the same function as a city wall. It defined the space that was defended and separated it from the space that was not. Saruman's ring became a container. The enclosure that was designed to protect became the enclosure that confined the industrial operation. That kept the pits and the forges and the breeding chambers within a defined boundary. The ring that was designed to keep enemies out became the ring that kept the production in. The Ents flood filled the ring. The water, released by the broken dam, filled the enclosed space the way water fills a bowl. The ring that was designed to protect and that had been repurposed to contain became the ring that was flooded the boundary that now held the water that drowned the industrial operation. The ring of stone changes function with each phase of the fortress's history. Protection, containment, basin, the physical structure does not change. The function changes. And the changing function is the changing purpose, the specific quality of the occupant's will, expressed in the use to which the unchanging structure is put. The ring is also a ring, not just a wall ring. The specific, symbolic, Tolkien-loaded shape that recurs throughout the mythology as the shape of binding, of enclosure, of the specific quality of power that constrains. The One Ring is a ring. The rings of power are rings. And the ring of Isengard is a ring, a circle of stone that encloses, binds, constrains, and that functions differently depending on the will that operates within it. The ring of stone, like the ring of power, is not evil in itself. The ring is a structure, a boundary, a shape. The evil or the good is in the purpose that the ring serves. The in-memoriam ring served protection. Saruman's ring served production. The Ents ring served restoration. The ring endures. The purposes change. And the endurance of the ring, outlasting every purpose that has been imposed on it, is the specific architectural expression of the truth that structures outlast intentions, and that the structures we build will serve purposes we did not design them for, in ways we did not foresee, for occupants we never imagined. Part 26. Orthanc and the Palantir after the war. After the war, King Elisar Aragorn reclaims both Orthanc and the Palantir. The reclamation is the return of the in-memoriam artifacts to the in-memoriam heir, the specific, legally and symbolically significant act of the rightful owner recovering his property. The Palantir, the seeing stone that Saruman used to contact Sauron, that Pippin looked into, that Grima threw from the tower, the Palantir is returned to the legitimate communication network. Aragorn uses the Orthanc stone to communicate with the other Palantri, restoring the function that the stones were originally designed for. The restoration of the Palantir's legitimate function is the most precise example of the restoration theme that runs through the entire Isengard story. The tool that was used for evil is reclaimed for good. The communication device that became a corruption channel is returned to its designed purpose. The seeing stone that connected Saruman to Sauron now connects the rightful king to the legitimate governance of the restored kingdom. Aragorn can use the Palantir without being corrupted by it. This is the specific, morally significant difference between the rightful user and the corrupted user. Aragorn looks into the stone and sees what is there, without being misdirected by what he sees. The stone shows him the truth, the full truth, not the selectively curated truth that Sauron showed Saruman. And the full truth, received by a will that is oriented towards service rather than domination, produces wisdom rather than corruption. The stone is the same stone. The difference is the user. The stone that corrupted Saruman serves Aragorn, not because the stone has changed. Because the will that looks through the stone has changed. Orthanc becomes a possession of the reunited kingdom. The tower that served Gondor in the early Third Age, that was abandoned during Gondor's decline. That was given to Saruman during the Stewards' era. And that survived the Ents' assault unchanged. That tower is now the property of the restored king. The tower has come home. The Anmenrian structure, built by the Anmenrian engineers, is once again in the hands of an Anmenrian heir. The 3,000-year detour, the centuries of neglect, the Dunlending occupation, the Saruman era, the Ents' assault, the detour is over. The tower belongs to the lineage that built it. Part 26b. The Gatekeepers of Isengard. Throughout its 3,000-year history, Isengard has had gatekeepers, the beings who control access to the fortress, who determine who enters and who does not. And the identity of the gatekeepers tells you more about the fortress's condition than the identity of the tower's occupant. The Anmenrian gatekeepers were soldiers, professional military personnel posted to the gate, controlling access through the specific, institutional, procedurally defined protocols that a military installation requires. The soldiers checked credentials, verified identities. The gate was controlled by the institution. The Dunlending gatekeepers were settlers. When the Dunlendings occupied the fortress, the gate was open, controlled by whoever happened to be standing near it. The institutional protocols were absent. The gate was a passage rather than a checkpoint. Saruman's gatekeepers were servants. Agents, the specific quality of the wizard's household, controlled the gate. The access was determined not by protocol, but by the wizard's will. The gate opened for those the wizard wished to enter, and closed for those the wizard wished to exclude. The Ents gatekeepers were Ents. After the assault, Treebeard posted Ents at the gate, the ancient beings, standing among the ruins, controlling access to the flooded fortress, with the specific quality of natural authority that the tree shepherds command. Merry and Pippin are the gatekeepers when Thodin and the company arrive. This is the most symbolically rich gatekeeping moment in the entire history. Two hobbits, sitting on the rubble of the destroyed gate, greeting the kings and warriors of the Western Alliance with the casual hospitality of hosts who have the run of a place they do not own. The inversion is the point. The fortress that was designed for the most serious purpose is now operated by the least serious beings. The gate that controlled access to the most dangerous facility in Western Middle-earth is now managed by beings whose primary concern is whether there is enough salted pork. The hobbits at the gate are the mythology's final comment on the fortress's 3,000-year history of Sirius. Purposeful gatekeeping. The most important gates are sometimes best kept by the least important people. Part 26c. Isengard in the Fourth Age. The Fourth Age is the age of Isengard's quiet recovery. The Ents tend the fortress. The trees grow. The water flows through channels that the Ents have shaped, not with Saruman's engineering, but with the natural world's patience, guiding the water along courses that the tree's roots define and the landscape's contours suggest. Orthanc stands in the new forest. The tower that was surrounded by gardens, then by industry, then by water, is now surrounded by trees. The trees do not approach the tower's base, the stone is too smooth for root growth. But the trees surround the tower at a distance, creating the specific visual quality of a dark monolith in a green ring, a vertical black line in a horizontal green circle. The fortress is peaceful, the specific quality of a place where significant things have happened, and where the memory persists in the landscape. This quality endures in the Fourth Age fortress. The place remembers. Not consciously, in the stone and the water, and the specific quality of damaged and restored landscape that carries the memory of everything that happened there. Visitors come. Not many, but some come to see the tower, come to see the ring of stone, come to see the place where the Ents walked and the water rose, and the greatest industrial operation in western Middle-earth was drowned in an afternoon. The visitors see the trees, see the water, see the tower, and the visitors, if they know the history, can read the landscape the way you read a book, can see the layers, can identify the phases, can understand the specific architectural story that the fortress tells about the 3,000 years of its existence. The fortress tells its story in stone and water and trees. The story is not simple. The story is not comfortable. The story is the complete history of a place that was built by builders who wanted to protect the world, corrupted by a wizard who wanted to control the world, destroyed by a forest that wanted to defend itself, and restored by a king who wanted the world to heal. The fortress tells this story silently. The stone does not speak, the tower does not narrate. But the story is there, present in the architecture, readable in the landscape, available to anyone who knows how to look. Part 27. Isengard and the Other Fortresses. Isengard's story is illuminated by comparison with the other great fortresses of Middle-earth, because the comparisons reveal the specific quality that makes Isengard's history unique. Minas Tirith, the White City. The greatest fortress of Gondor has a history of continuous occupation. The city has been lived in, fought for, maintained, and defended across the entire Third Age. Minas Tirith's walls have been tested by siege and have held. The city's identity is continuous, the same city, the same walls. The same people, more or less, from the Second Age to the end of the Third. Isengard has a history of discontinuous occupation. The fortress has been built, garrisoned, abandoned, squatted, reclaimed, given away, corrupted, destroyed, and restored. The identity is not continuous. The fortress has been many things to many occupants, and each occupant has imposed a different identity on the unchanging structure. Helm's Deep, the Rohirric fortress that was originally the Gondorian stronghold of Aglarond, has a history of transformation through change of hands. The fortress was built by one people and inherited by another, and the inheriting people made it their own. Helm's Deep's identity changed when the Rohirrim arrived, but the change was organic. The new people absorbed the old fortress into their culture and gave it new meaning. Isengard's changes of identity are not organic. They are imposed. Each new occupant does not absorb the fortress into their culture, they impose their purpose on the fortress's structure. The Enmenrians impose military purpose. Saruman imposes industrial purpose. The Ents impose natural purpose. Each imposition is deliberate, and each imposition contradicts the previous one. Barad Dr. Sauron's fortress in Mordor is the fortress that Isengard most closely parallels and most profoundly differs from. Barad Tar is built by its occupant. Sauron designed Barad Tar, constructed Barad Tar, and inhabits Barad Tar. The fortress and the occupant are identical. The fortress is the expression of the occupant's will, and the destruction of the fortress is the destruction of the occupant's power. Isengard is not built by Saruman. Saruman inherits Isengard. The fortress is not the expression of Saruman's will, it is the canvas on which Saruman imposes his will. And the distinction matters because the canvas survives the imposition. When Saruman's modifications are destroyed, the canvas remains. When Barad Dr. falls, everything falls. There is nothing beneath the Dark Lord's construction, no inherited structure, no Menrean foundation that endures beyond the occupant's reign. Isengard endures because Isengard was not built by the being who corrupted it. The fortress's identity, its Menrean identity, its designed purpose, its specific quality of enduring construction, is independent of the wizard's purpose. The wizard's purpose is temporary. The fortress is permanent. This is the most profound difference between Isengard and Barad-dûrthr, and it carries the mythology's deepest lesson about the relationship between making and corruption. Barad-dûrthr is built from corruption. The Dark Tower is the physical expression of Sauron's will, and Sauron's will is corrupted. The corruption is in the foundation. The corruption is structural. When the foundation falls, when the ring is destroyed, and Sauron's will is broken, Barad-dûrthr falls completely. Nothing survives. The tower that was built on corruption crumbles when the corruption is removed, because there is nothing beneath the corruption to stand on. Isengard is corrupted, but it is not built from corruption. The Enmenrian foundation is uncorrupted. The stone is clean. The design is sound. The purpose that the builders built into the architecture, the purpose of defense, of protection, of the specific quality of watching over that the watchtower represents this purpose, is still present in the stone, even when Saruman's purpose has corrupted the fortress's current function. When Saruman's corruption is removed, when the Ents destroy the modifications, when the water drowns the industry, when the wizard departs, the fortress does not fall. The fortress stands. Because the foundation is sound. Because the stone is clean. Because the Enmenrian purpose, built into the architecture 3,000 years ago, survives the corruption that was layered on top of it. Barad-dûrthr falls because Barad-dûrthr has no uncorrupted foundation. Isengard stands because Isengard has an uncorrupted foundation. The difference between the two fortresses is the difference between corruption that is structural and corruption that is superficial, between evil that is built into the thing from the beginning and evil that is added to the thing after the thing is built. The lesson is theological as well as architectural. The thing that is built with good purpose, built with sound principles, built on an uncorrupted foundation, can survive the corruption that is layered on top of it. The corruption can be removed. The modifications can be undone. The thing that is beneath the corruption, the original, uncorrupted, well-built thing, can be recovered. But the thing that is built on corruption, built from the beginning with corrupted purpose, built with unsound principles, built on a foundation of domination, that thing cannot survive the removal of the corruption, because the corruption is the only thing holding it together. Isengard can be healed. Barad-dûrthr can only be destroyed. The difference is in the foundation. And the foundation is the builder's legacy, the specific, irrevocable, 3,000-year enduring quality of what was built into the stone when the stone was first shaped. Part 28. The Fortress and the Wizard, what Saruman revealed about himself. The specific way that Saruman transformed Isengard tells you more about Saruman's character than any analysis of his motives or his strategies. A person's relationship with the space they inhabit reveals their relationship with the world. The way you treat your home, the way you modify it, maintain it, change it to serve your purposes, reveals what you value, what you dismiss, what you consider important, and what you consider expendable. Saruman removed the gardens. This tells you that beauty was expendable, that the specific, non-functional, aesthetically valuable quality of cultivated beauty, the quality that the Enmenrian builders considered important enough to include in a military installation, was, in Saruman's assessment, not worth the space it occupied. Saruman dug the pits. This tells you that depth was valuable, that the unseen, the underground, the hidden infrastructure that operates beneath the surface, this was the dimension that Saruman's purposes required. The surface was for display. The depths were for production. The visible was less important than the invisible. Saruman dammed the river. This tells you that nature was a resource, not a value. The river which had its own course and its own purpose, the natural flow that the ecosystem depended on, was in Saruman's assessment a source of energy to be captured and directed, rather than a living thing to be respected. Saruman kept the tower. This tells you that he recognized quality, recognized the Memorian work as something he could not improve, as something that transcended his own capability. The tower was the one thing Saruman did not modify, and the non-modification is the most honest moment in Saruman's relationship with Isengard, the moment when the wizard acknowledges that the builder's craft exceeds his own. The sum of these choices: the gardens removed, the pits dug, the river dammed, the tower kept, is the portrait of a specific kind of intelligence, the intelligence that values function over beauty, production over cultivation, control over respect, and that recognizes excellence even when it cannot replicate it. This intelligence is not evil in itself. An intelligence that values function, production, and control is an intelligence that can build civilizations. The problem is not the intelligence. The problem is the absence of the counterbalancing values, the beauty, the cultivation, the respect for the world's own purposes that keep the functional intelligence from becoming the destructive intelligence. Saruman had the intelligence without the counterbalance, and Isengard, the fortress that expressed his intelligence without the counterbalance, is the physical record of what happens when a brilliant mind operates without the specific quality of wisdom that says, not everything that can be done should be done. Not everything that can be made should be made. Not everything that can be controlled should be controlled. Part 29. The Fortress and the War it Shaped. Isengard's role in the War of the Ring is larger than the battles that were fought at its walls. The fortress shaped the war, shaped its geography, its timing, its specific quality of strategic development in ways that extend far beyond the direct military actions that the fortress enabled. The war in Rohan, the war that produces Helm's Deep, and the Pelennor Charge, and the death of Thodin, the war in Rohan, is Isengard's war. The war is fought because the fortress's occupant decided to fight it. The war is fought where it is fought because the fortress's position determines the geography of the conflict. The war is fought when it is fought because the fortress's industrial capability determines the timing of the offensive. Without Isengard, there is no war in Rohan. Without the fortress's strategic position at the Gap, Saruman cannot threaten Rohan's western border. Without the fortress's industrial capability, Saruman cannot produce the Uruk-hai army. Without the fortress's communication infrastructure, the palantir that connects Saruman to Sauron, the coordination between the western and eastern fronts of the war against the Free Peoples does not occur. Isengard makes the Western War possible. The fortress is not simply the base from which the war is conducted. The fortress is the condition of the war's existence. Remove Isengard from the mythology, and the War of the Ring looks completely different. Rohan is not attacked from the west. Helm's Deep does not happen. Thodin is not forced to choose between defending his own kingdom and riding to Gondor's aid. The specific shape of the war, the two-front quality, the simultaneous attacks from east and west that stretch the Free People's resources to the breaking point, this shape is Isengard's contribution. The fortress at the Gap makes the Western Front possible, and the Western Front makes the Eastern Front more dangerous, and the combination threatens the survival of the entire Western Alliance. Sauron understands this. Sauron's coordination with Saruman through the Palantir is not a formal alliance. Sauron does not trust Saruman, and Saruman does not intend to serve Sauron. But the coordination serves both their purposes. Sauron benefits from the Western Front because it diverts Rohan's military strength away from Gondor. Saruman benefits from the Eastern Front because it diverts Gondor's attention away from Isengard. The fortress enables the coordination. The palantir enables the communication. The strategic position enables the two-front war. Isengard is the linchpin of the dual-front strategy that nearly destroys the Western Alliance. When the Ents destroy Isengard, they are not simply destroying a fortress. They are destroying the western front of the war. The destruction of Isengard's industrial capability eliminates the threat to Rohan from the west, freeing Rohan's military strength to ride east, to ride to Gondor's aid, to make the charge at Pelennor that the oath requires, and that the strategic situation, with the western front eliminated, now permits. The Ents' assault on Isengard makes the Pelennor charge possible. Without the Ents, Rohan cannot ride east, cannot leave the western border undefended, cannot commit its full military strength to the aid of Gondor. With the Ents, Rohan can ride, the western threat is eliminated, the border is secure, and the full strength of the Rohirrim is available for the eastern ride. The trees make the charge possible. The charge makes the victory possible. The victory makes the world possible. The chain runs from the Ents to the charge to the victory, and the chain begins at Isengard, at the fortress whose destruction frees the Rohirrim to fulfill the oath that saves the world. Part 30. What the Ents did that nobody expected. The Ents' destruction of Isengard is the most unexpected event in the War of the Ring, and the unexpectedness is itself a strategic lesson. Nobody expected the Ents. Not Saruman, whose analytical intelligence had catalogued every strategic variable in Western Middle-earth, but had not accounted for the possibility that the trees would fight back. Not Sauron, whose far-seeing eye surveyed the entire theatre of war, but could not see the slow beings in the ancient forest. Not Gandalf, who knew the Ents existed, but did not know whether the Ents would act, and whose plan did not depend on the Ents acting. The unexpectedness is the point. The Ents represent the strategic variable that no analytical intelligence can predict, the possibility that the things you have dismissed as irrelevant will turn out to be decisive. Saruman dismissed the natural world, treated the forest as a resource, as timber to be cut, as fuel to be burned, as raw material for the industrial operation. The forest was not a strategic actor in Saruman's analysis. The forest was material, and material does not fight back. Except this material did fight back. The forest walked, the trees the specific, ancient, supposedly passive things that Saruman had been feeding to his forges, those things woke up and came to Isengard and tore it apart. The Ents are the mythology's answer to the analytical intelligence that reduces the world to variables. The analytical intelligence can predict the behavior of variables it has identified. The analytical intelligence cannot predict the behavior of things it has dismissed as non-variables. And the things dismissed as non-variables, the slow things, the old things, the things that do not appear in the strategic analysis because they do not seem to matter, those things, when they finally act, are the most devastating because no defense has been prepared against them. The destruction of Isengard is accomplished by the things Saruman did not plan for. The most sophisticated military-industrial complex in Western Middle-earth is destroyed not by a superior military force, but by a force that the complex's creator did not believe existed as a force at all. Part 31. The Two Hobbits and the Longbottom Leaf. When Merry and Pippin are discovered at the gate of the flooded Isengard, they have found something in the fortress's storerooms. Pipeweed. Specifically, barrels of Longbottom Leaf from the Shire. The pipeweed is a clue. The presence of Shire-grown pipeweed in Saruman's storerooms reveals the extent of the intelligence network that Saruman had established in the Shire, reveals that the connection between Isengard and the Shire was not merely informational, but commercial. Saruman was importing goods from the Shire. The commercial relationship was the infrastructure that supported the intelligence relationship. The pipeweed also reveals something personal about Saruman. The wizard liked the stuff. Saruman smoked pipeweed. The serious, analytical, strategically minded white wizard, the being who was breeding Uruk-hai in underground pits and plotting the conquest of Western Middle-earth, that being also enjoyed smoking the hobbit's leaf. The detail is humanizing. Not forgiving the pipeweed does not make Saruman's crimes any less criminal, but humanizing. The detail says the wizard is not simply a machine of evil. The wizard has appetites, has pleasures, has the specific quality of personal indulgence that even the most terrible people possess. The pipeweed in Isengard's storerooms is the specific, material, physically present evidence that connections exist where you do not expect them. The connection between the most dangerous fortress in Western Middle-earth and the most peaceful corner of the Shire, a connection that exists because a wizard likes to smoke. This connection is the mythology's specific illustration of the principle that everything is connected to everything else, and that the connections are often more surprising and more significant than anyone expects. Gandalf notices the pipeweed, notices the connection it implies, files the information away. The detail that seems trivial, a barrel of pipeweed in a storeroom, is the thread that, pulled, reveals the web of Saruman's Shire operation, the web that later produces the scouring of the Shire, the thread that connects the destruction of Isengard to the violation of the Shire, the connection that says Saruman's ambition does not end with Isengard's fall. The wizard has been building in the Shire too. Part 32. The Architecture of Corruption. Let me draw together the architectural history of Isengard into a single statement, because the architecture tells the story more precisely than any narrative analysis. The Nememrians built Isengard as a circle containing a garden containing a tower. The circle protects, the garden lives. The tower watches. The three elements, protection, life, observation, are the three functions that the builders designed into the fortress's architecture. And the architecture expresses the builder's values. The world should be protected, life should be cultivated, and the watchers should keep their eyes open. Saruman converted Isengard from a circle containing a garden containing a tower to a circle containing a factory containing a laboratory. The circle still protects, but it now protects the factory rather than the garden. The factory produces, but it produces weapons rather than cultivating life. The tower still watches, but it now watches through a corrupted palantir rather than through the legitimate surveillance that the builders intended. The Ents converted Isengard from a circle containing a factory to a circle containing a lake. The factory is drowned. The lake replaces the garden, and the factory are like a natural feature, where the cultivated feature and the industrial feature once stood. The tower still watches unchanged, unmodified, standing in the water as it stood in the garden, as it stood in the factory. Aragorn's reclamation converts Isengard from a circle containing a lake, containing a tower, to a circle containing a garden containing a tower, returning the fortress to something approaching its original design. The circle protects again. The garden lives again. The tower watches again, now through a legitimately used palantir. The architectural cycle is the moral cycle. Construction, corruption, destruction, restoration, the four phases of the fortress's history are the four movements of the mythology's central drama. The good thing is built. The good thing is corrupted. The corrupted thing is destroyed. And the destroyed thing is restored. The cycle is not a circle. The restoration does not return the fortress to its exact original condition. The Ents' garden is not the Menrian's garden. Aragorn's Isengard is not Elendil's Isengard. The restoration is approximate, close to the original, aligned with the original purpose, but marked by the specific quality of scars that the corruption left. The scars are part of the restoration. The restored Isengard remembers its corruption carries the marks of the pits and the forges, and the industrial violation in the landscape even after the restoration has replanted the trees and refilled the pools. The memory of the corruption is part of the restoration's quality, the specific awareness that the good thing was violated, and that the violation, though healed, leaves traces that the healing cannot completely erase. Part 33. The Fortress that Survived Everything. Let me state the obvious, because the obvious is the most important thing about Isengard. The fortress survived everything. The Ainmerians built it. It survived the fall of Menor. Gondor garrisoned it. It survived the decline of Gondor. The Dunlendings occupied it. It survived the occupation. Saruman corrupted it. It survived the corruption. The Ents destroyed it. It survived the destruction. The war ended. It survived the peace. The fortress survived everything, because the fortress was built by builders who built to last. The Ainmerian craft, the specific quality of stonework that uses techniques lost with the drowned island, produced a structure that outlasts every purpose imposed on it. The Ring of Stone stands. The tower stands. The fundamental architecture endures while the occupants change and the purposes change, and the world around the fortress changes and the fortress remains. This endurance is not passive. The endurance is the fortress's most important quality, the quality that makes the history possible. The fortress endures, and because the fortress endures, the fortress can be used and misused and restored and used again. The endurance creates the canvas on which the successive occupants paint their purposes. Without the endurance, there is no canvas. Without the canvas, there is no history. The fortress's endurance is also a statement about craft. The specific quality of the Ainmerian work, the quality that makes the stone impervious, the tower unbreakable. The Ring of Stone indestructible, this quality, is a statement about what craft can achieve when craft is directed toward endurance rather than toward immediate effect. Saruman's modifications were directed toward immediate effect. The pits produced soldiers. The forges produced weapons. The modifications served the immediate purpose and did not survive the purpose's failure. The modifications were temporary as the purpose that justified them. The Ainmerian construction was directed toward endurance. The ring was built to last. The tower was built to last. The construction served a purpose, but the construction also transcended. The purpose was built with the specific quality of lasting that outlasts the specific purpose that justified the building. The difference between the temporary and the enduring is the difference between craft for purpose and craft for permanence. Saruman built for purpose. The Ainmerians built for permanence. And the permanence outlasts the purpose, outlasts every purpose, survives every occupation, endures through every phase of the fortress's long history. The fortress that survived everything is the fortress that was built by builders who built for everything, not for a specific purpose, for all purposes. For the specific quality of endurance that says, whatever comes, the fortress stands. Whatever changes, the stone remains. Whatever is done to this place, the place itself is stronger than the doing. Part 30. What Isengard teaches about power. Isengard's history is a 3,000-year lesson about the relationship between power and the structures that contain it. Lesson 1. Power is not the structure. Power is the will that operates through the structure. Isengard is the same fortress regardless of who occupies it. The power changes when the occupant changes. The structure does not. Lesson 2. Structures outlast the wills that build them. The Nummenorian will that built Isengard is long gone. The builders are dead, their kingdom destroyed, their civilization scattered. But the structure they built endures. The will that designed the fortress is dead. The fortress is alive. Lesson 3. Structures can be repurposed. The fortress that was designed for defense can be repurposed for aggression. The watchtower can be repurposed as a prison. The communications hub can be repurposed as a corruption channel. The structure does not resist repurposing. The structure is indifferent to the purpose it serves. Lesson 4. Repurposing reveals the repurposer. The specific way that Saruman repurposed Isengard, the gardens killed, the pits dug, the river dammed, reveals Saruman's character more precisely than any analysis of his motives. The structure, in the hands of the new occupant, becomes the portrait of the new occupant. Lesson 5. The original purpose can be restored. The structure that was repurposed for evil can be repurposed for good. The restoration is not automatic. It requires the specific quality of will that says this structure should serve its original purpose, but the possibility of restoration is always present, because the structure, which outlasts every purpose, is always available for the next purpose. These lessons, taken together, form the mythology's most complete statement about the relationship between the made thing and the maker's will. The made thing is neutral. The will is moral. The made thing can serve good or evil, defense or aggression, protection or domination. The moral quality is in the will, not in the structure. Isengard is not evil. Isengard was used for evil. The distinction is the distinction between the instrument and the intent. And the history of Isengard, the 3,000-year history of a single fortress serving multiple purposes, is the extended demonstration of this distinction. Part 35. The Scouring and Isengard's Shadow. The Scouring of the Shire, the final chapter of Saruman's story. The broken wizard's petty tyranny in the hobbit's homeland is Isengard's shadow, extending beyond the fortress's walls. The industrial operation that Saruman developed at Isengard was not confined to Isengard. The model, the specific, systematic, production-oriented approach to governance that treats the world as raw material and the population as labor, was exported. To the Shire. Saruman's operation in the Shire reproduces the Isengard model at a smaller scale. The trees are cut, the gardens are paved over, the water is polluted, the hobbits are put to work. The specific quality of industrial violation that transformed Isengard's interior is applied to the Shire's landscape. Part 35b. Isengard and the Shire Mirror Images. The parallel between Isengard and the Shire is one of the most structurally precise parallels in the entire Lord of the Rings, and it deserves specific attention because the parallel reveals the universality of the industrial violation. Isengard is a fortress. The Shire is a garden. The fortress has walls of stone. The garden has hedges of hawthorn. The fortress has a tower at its center. The garden has the party tree at its center. The fortress is organized around military purpose. The garden is organized around agricultural purpose. The two places could not be more different. And yet the same violation is applied to both. Saruman's operation strips Isengard of its gardens and replaces them with industry. Saruman's operation strips the Shire of its gardens and replaces them with industry. The specific quality of the violation, the removal of the growing thing and its replacement with the made thing, the elimination of beauty and its replacement with production, is identical in both locations. The identity of the violation tells you that the violation is not location-specific. The violation is ideology-specific. The mind of metal and wheels does not care where it operates. The mind of metal and wheels will transform a fortress or a shire, a military installation or a hobbit village, with the same indifference to the specific quality of the place it transforms. The violation is universal. The response is local. The Ents respond to the violation of Isengard with the Ents mode of response: ancient, powerful, overwhelming. The hobbits respond to the violation of the Shire with the hobbits mode of response: personal, communal, stubborn, and ultimately effective through the specific quality of "we will not accept this" that the hobbit character produces. The two responses, the Ents and the hobbits, are structurally identical despite being superficially different. Both responses are the local community defending its home against an industrial violation. Both responses are the specific, place-embedded, identity-grounded quality of "this is ours," and you cannot take it applied to the specific quality of industrial taking that Saruman represents. The parallel says the violation can happen anywhere: the fortress and the garden, the military installation and the hobbit village, the great and the small. The mind of metal and wheels does not discriminate. The mind of metal and wheels will transform whatever it touches into whatever it needs, regardless of what the touched thing is or what the touched thing values. And the response can come from anywhere, from the oldest beings in the world, from the smallest, from the trees that walk and the hobbits who refuse. The response is not determined by power or size or strategic significance. The response is determined by the specific quality of caring about the place you live that the violation attacks, and that the violation, ultimately, cannot destroy. The Ents care about the forest. The hobbits care about the Shire. The caring is the same caring. The defense is the same defense. And the restoration, the trees replanted, the gardens recovered, the specific quality of homeness restored, the restoration is the same restoration. Isengard and the Shire, the fortress and the garden, the great place and the small place, both violated, both restored, both telling the same story. The mind of metal and wheels can damage, but the caring is stronger than the damage, and the restoration, though it takes time and leaves scars, is real. Part 35, C. The Rohirric Songs about Isengard. The Rohirrim sing about Isengard. The songs that the Rohirric oral tradition preserves include the fortress as a presence, the dark tower at the gap between the mountains, the place that has been sometimes friend and sometimes enemy and always there. The Rohirric songs about Isengard have a specific quality that the songs about other locations do not: ambivalence. The songs about Helm's Deep are celebratory. The songs about the Pelennor are triumphant. The songs about Isengard are ambivalent. The fortress was an ally's stronghold that became an enemy's base. The fortress was a protector that became a threat. The ambivalence is honest. The fortress's history is ambivalent. The songs capture the ambivalence because the songs are honest, and honest songs about ambivalent things are themselves ambivalent. After the war, new songs are composed. Songs that include the Ents, songs that include the flooding, songs that capture the specific, cathartic quality of the natural world's response to the industrial violation. The new songs add a new movement to the Isengard narrative, the movement of restoration. The four-movement structure: construction, corruption, destruction, restoration, becomes the framework of the Rohirric songs about Isengard. The songs trace the cycle from the Anmenrian builders through Saruman's corruption, through the Ents' destruction, through the tree's restoration. And the cycle, rendered in the specific form of the Rohirric oral tradition, becomes part of the identity that the songs sustain. The Rohirrim remember Isengard honestly, remember the protection, and the betrayal. Remember the fortress and the factory. Remember the gardens and the pits. And the remembering ensures that the lessons of Isengard, the lessons about trust and betrayal, about craft and corruption, about the relationship between the maid and the grown, are preserved in the songs and transmitted to the riders who will come after. The scouring is Isengard without the fortress. The industrial model, the mind of metal and wheels operating without the architectural container that Isengard provided. The model is the thing. The fortress was just the first expression. The hobbits resist. The hobbits drive out the ruffians, confront Saruman, and begin the restoration of the Shire. Sam plants the seed that Galadriel gave him, the seed of a Malorn tree, the golden tree of the elves, and the tree grows in the party field, and the Shire is healed. The Shire's restoration mirrors Isengard's restoration. The trees grow back. The gardens are replanted. The natural landscape recovers from the industrial violation. The specific quality of life that the industrial model destroyed reasserts itself slowly, patiently, with a specific quality of natural resilience that outlasts the artificial force that temporarily displaced it. Isengard and the Shire, two locations, separated by hundreds of miles, both violated by the same mind, both restored by the same principle. The principle is life. The principle is the natural world's capacity to recover from violation, to grow back, to fill the spaces that the violation left empty, to reassert the specific quality of livingness that the industrial model cannot permanently suppress. The fortress and the Shire are connected by the mind that violated them both, connected by the principle that restored them both. And the connection is the mythology's most comprehensive statement about the relationship between the industrial and the natural. The industrial can violate the natural, can temporarily suppress it, can impose the specific quality of metal and wheels production on the living landscape. But the natural recovers. The trees grow back. The gardens return. The life that was displaced reasserts itself. The restoration takes time. The restoration leaves scars. But the restoration happens at Isengard and in the Shire alike. The natural world is more patient than the industrial world. And patience, in the mythology's moral framework, is stronger than force. Part 36. The Fortress and Time. Isengard's relationship with time is different from any other location in the mythology, and the difference is instructive. Most locations in Tolkien's world are defined by their moment. Helm's Deep is the battle. The Pelennor is the charge. Rivendell is the council. The Black Gate is the last stand. These locations are crystallized around their moments of greatest significance, the moments when the narrative's attention is focused on them, and when their meaning is established. Isengard is defined by its duration. Not by a single moment, but by the passage of time, by the 3,000 years of successive occupants, changing purposes, and evolving significance. Isengard's meaning is not established in a moment. It is accumulated across millennia. The accumulation gives Isengard a specific quality that the other locations lack: depth. The fortress has layers, not just the physical layers of memory and construction and Saruman's modifications. Historical layers. Each phase of the fortress's history adds a layer of meaning to the structure, and the layer's construction: Golden Age, decline, abandonment, Dunlending occupation. Saruman's arrival, the gardens dying, the pits opening, the Ents assault, the restoration. The layers together create a palimpsest. A text written over a text, written over a text, each text visible through the ones above it. The deepest text is the Enmenraean text. The Ring of Stone. The Tower. The original purpose. This text is always visible, always present beneath the successive overwritings, because the Menrian construction is indestructible. The surface texts change, the deep text endures. The fortress's relationship with time is the relationship of the permanent with the temporary. The permanent structure accommodates the temporary purposes. The temporary purposes come and go. The permanent structure remains. And the remaining the specific quality of being there across millennia, regardless of what is done to the space or by whom, is the fortress's essential character. Isengard is the mythology's most eloquent statement about the relationship between permanence and purpose. Permanence outlasts purpose. The builder's craft outlasts the builder's intention. The structure survives the plan. And the survival of the structure beyond the plan that justified its construction is the condition that makes the structure's subsequent history possible. Without permanence, there is no history. The temporary thing, the thing that does not last beyond its original purpose, has no history. It has a purpose and an end. The permanent thing, the thing that outlasts its original purpose and is available for subsequent purposes, has a history. It has a past and a future. It has the specific quality of narrative depth that comes from having been many things to many people. Isengard has been many things. That is its story. Part 37. The fortress as a character. In a mythology populated by elves, wizards, hobbits, ents, and the various races of Middle-earth, the most unusual character in the Isengard narrative is the fortress itself. Isengard acts like a character. It has a history, a beginning, a development, a crisis, and a resolution. It has a consistent identity, the Menrian construction, the ring of stone, the indestructible tower. It has agency, in the specific sense that the fortress's physical properties shape the events that happen within and around it. The tower's height enables the imprisonment of Gandalf and the voice projection of Saruman. The ring's enclosure enables the Ents flooding. The pit's depth enables the Uruk-hai production. The fortress does not choose. The fortress is not conscious. But the fortress's properties, its height, its enclosure, its depth, its indestructibility, determine the range of things that can be done within and to it. The fortress constrains the occupant's choices, just as a character's nature constrains their actions. Saruman is constrained by Isengard. The wizard cannot make the tower taller. The tower is what it is. The wizard cannot break the ring is what it is. The wizard can only modify the interior, can only change the things that the permanent structure allows to be changed. The gardens can be killed because the gardens are mortal. The earth can be dug because the earth is soft. But the stone cannot be altered because the stone is Menrian, and a Menrian stone does not yield to the wizard's will. The fortress constrains the Ents. The Ents cannot break the tower, cannot scratch it, cannot harm it, cannot modify it in any way. The Ents can break everything else. The walls, snow. Those are in Menrian too. The secondary structures, yes. The modifications, yes. The dam, yes. The Ents' destruction is comprehensive but bounded by the specific quality of Menrian construction that exceeds even the Ents' power. The fortress constrains Aragorn. The king inherits the fortress, but the king cannot remake it, can only use it, can only inhabit it, can only impose a new purpose on the unchanged structure. The tower is the same tower. The ring is the same ring. The king's Isengard is architecturally identical to the wizard's Isengard and the garrison's Isengard and the builder's Isengard. The fortress constrains everyone equally. The structure does not care who inhabits it, does not adjust itself to the occupant's preferences, does not modify itself to serve the occupant's purposes. The structure is what it is, and the occupant must work within the structure's constraints or not work at all. This impartial constraint is the specific quality that makes the fortress a character The fortress has its own nature, independent of the occupant's will, and the occupant's actions are shaped by the fortress's nature, in the same way that a character's actions are shaped by their own nature. Part 38. The Tower as a Symbol. Orthanc is the most symbolically dense object in Tolkien's mythology. Every detail of the tower carries meaning, and the meanings layer on each other the way the fortress's historical phases layer on each other. The height. 500 feet. The tallest man-made structure in Western Middle-earth. The height says, "I see everything." The watcher in this tower can see to the horizon in every direction. The height is surveillance. The height is knowledge. The height is the specific quality of elevated perspective that sees the broad picture and misses the details. Saruman, in his tower, sees broadly and misses the hobbits. The elevation that gives him the strategic view costs him the ground-level view. The height that lets him see armies and fortresses and the movements of nations does not let him see the gardener and the cook walking toward Mount Doom. The darkness. The stone is dark black, or nearly black. In a mythology where light is consistently associated with good and darkness with evil, the dark stone of Orthanc is complicated. The tower is not evil. The tower was built by the Ainmerians, who were not evil not when they built it. The dark stone is the builder's aesthetic choice, not a moral statement. But the darkness becomes a moral statement when Saruman inhabits it. The dark tower, inhabited by the corrupted wizard, becomes the visual expression of the corruption the dark stone, mirroring the darkened purpose. The visual darkness matching the moral darkness. The tower's darkness, which was neutral when the Menreans built it, becomes sinister when Saruman lives in it, not because the stone has changed, but because the eye that looks at it has changed. The four prongs. The tower's summit has 4 pillars, 4 tall prongs that rise to the flat platform at the top. The shape has been compared to a hand, a grasping hand, reaching upward, clutching at. The comparison is apt, because grasping is the specific quality of Saruman's relationship with the world. The wizard grasps at power, grasps at the ring, grasps at the control that the Maker's mentality desires. But the hand was there before Saruman. The Ainmerians built the 4 prongs. The grasping hand was not designed to grasp, was designed, perhaps, to reach, to aspire, to express the specific quality of human ambition that builds tall things and reaches for the sky. The reaching becomes grasping when the reacher's purpose changes. The same architectural feature the 4 prongs. The upward reach is aspiration or greed, depending on the purpose of the being who stands between the prongs. The indestructibility. The tower cannot be broken, cannot be scratched, cannot be harmed by any force that the peoples of Middle-earth can bring to bear. The indestructibility says, this is beyond you, this is not something you can undo. This is the product of a craft that transcends your capability to destroy. The indestructibility is both a comfort and a warning. A comfort because the tower will always be there, the permanent thing, the enduring thing, the thing that outlasts every temporary purpose. A warning because the indestructible thing cannot be controlled, cannot be modified, cannot be adjusted, cannot be made to serve a purpose it was not designed for. The indestructible thing will serve whoever inhabits it, but it will not be shaped by the inhabitant. The tower shapes the wizard. The wizard cannot shape the tower. Part 39. The Fortress and the Forest. The relationship between Isengard and Fangorn Forest is one of the mythology's most precisely drawn conflicts, and it extends far beyond the specific military clash between Saruman's forces and the Ents. Isengard is the made thing. Fangorn is the grown thing. The fortress is the product of craft designed, engineered, constructed according to a plan. The forest is the product of time grown, evolved, developed according to no plan at all, or according to a plan so vast and so slow that it is indistinguishable from no plan. The made thing and the grown thing have been neighbors for 3,000 years. For most of that time, the relationship was neutral. The fortress stood at the edge of the forest, and the forest grew at the edge of the fortress, and neither interfered with the other. The border between the grassland and the forest was the border between two modes of existence, the mode of making and the mode of growing. Saruman violated the border. Saruman's industrial operation reached into the forest, cut the trees, used the timber, fed the living forest to the dead forgers. The violation was the maker's fundamental error, the belief that the grown thing is raw material for the made thing, that the forest exists to serve the factory, that the natural world's value is measured by its utility to the industrial process. The Ent's response is the grown thing's answer to the made thing's aggression. The forest does not attack Isengard because the forest has a strategic plan. The forest attacks because the forest has been attacked. The response is defensive, the grown thing defending itself against the made thing's encroachment. The Ent's assault on Isengard is not a military operation. It is a natural reaction. The natural reaction is more devastating than any military operation could have been. The Ents destroy Isengard more completely than any army could have destroyed it, because the Ents operate in the specific mode of natural force that ignores the distinctions between military and civilian, between strategic and tactical, between the things that a military operation would target and the things it would spare. The Ents destroy everything within the ring that is not Menrian stone, everything that Saruman added, everything that the Maker made. The forest defeats the fortress, the grown thing defeats the made thing, the slow defeats the fast, the old defeats the new. The defeat is not permanent. The fortress survives the Menrian stone, the original making, endures beyond the Ents' assault. The defeat is of the modifications, not of the foundation. The Ents defeat Saruman's Isengard. They do not defeat the Menrian's Isengard. The distinction is the story's most precise expression of the relationship between the natural and the artificial. The natural can undo the artificial. The natural cannot undo the well-made. The Ents can destroy Saruman's factories. The Ents cannot destroy Orthanc's tower. The natural world has the power to reverse the artificial world's violations, but the natural world does not have the power to reverse the genuine craft that respects the natural world's principles. The Menrians respected the natural world. Their craft included gardens, their fortress included beauty, their making included growing. And the making that includes growing the craft that respects the natural world's principles produces structures that the natural world cannot destroy. Saruman did not respect the natural world. His craft excluded gardens. His fortress excluded beauty. His making excluded growing. And the making that excludes growing the craft that violates the natural world's principles produces structures that the natural world can and will destroy. Part 40. The Waters of Isengard. Water is the element that defines Isengard's final transformation, and the water's role deserves specific attention, because water is the natural world's most specific instrument of change. Water shaped Isengard before the fortress was built. The river Isen carved the valley. The springs beneath the mountains fed the water table. The specific geography of the Gap of Rohan, the terrain that made the location strategically significant, was shaped by water over geological time. The Menrians incorporated water into the fortress's design. The river was part of the infrastructure used for supply, for defense, for the hydraulic engineering that the Menrian tradition excelled at. The water was a partner in the construction, a natural force incorporated into the made thing. working with the craft rather than against it. Saruman controlled the water, dammed the river, redirected the flow, used the water's energy to power the industrial machinery. The partnership between water and craft was replaced by the domination of water by craft. The natural force was enslaved, captured, channeled, forced to serve the industrial purpose. The Ents freed the water, broke the dam, released the river, and the water, freed from the dam's control, flowing back to its natural course, flooded the fortress, drowned the pits, extinguished the forges, filled the ring of stone with the specific, natural, elemental force that the dam had contained. The water destroys by returning to its nature. The flood is not an attack, it is a release. The water does not choose to destroy the pits. The water flows downhill, as water does, and the pits happen to be downhill. The destruction is incidental to the water's nature. The water is not aggressive. The water is natural. And the natural, when it is freed from artificial constraint, follows its nature, and its nature, in this case, produces the specific consequence of flooding the fortress. The irony is that Saruman's own dam created the flood. The dam that was designed to control the water is the dam whose breaking releases the water. The control that was imposed on the natural force is the control whose removal produces the destruction. Saruman built the instrument of his own destruction, built the dam that, when broken, would drown everything he had built within the ring. The fortress, after the flood, is the fortress with the water in charge. The ring of stone, full of water, with the tower rising from the lake, this is the image of the natural element, freed from control, occupying the space that the artificial element had previously filled. The forges that burned are now underwater. The pits that produced are now flooded. The fire is replaced by water. The artificial is replaced by the natural. Part 41. What Tolkien was really writing about. Tolkien was writing about industrialization. Not exclusively, Tolkien's mythology is too rich and too multi-layered to be reduced to a single allegorical reading. But industrialization is one of the major themes, and Isengard is the mythology's most concentrated expression of the theme. Tolkien witnessed the industrialization of the English Midlands. Watched the countryside he loved, the specific, rural, agricultural, pre-industrial landscape of his childhood, be transformed by the factories and the mines, and the specific quality of industrial development that converted farmland into production facilities and streams into waste channels. Isengard is the Midland. Not literally, Tolkien denied allegory, and the denial should be respected. But the emotional quality of Isengard's transformation, the gardens dying, the forges burning, the natural landscape being replaced by the industrial landscape, this emotional quality is the emotional quality of watching the countryside you love being transformed by the industrial process you cannot. The gardens are the farms, the pits are the mines, the forges are the factories, the smoke is the pollution. The specific quality of Isengard under Saruman, the noise, the fire, the systematic destruction of the natural landscape in service of the production process, is the specific quality of the industrial Midlands that Tolkien remembered and mourned. The Ents are the nature that fights back, the hope, perhaps the fantasy, that the natural world will not simply submit to the industrial process, but will, eventually, in some form, reassert itself. The Ents' assault on Isengard is the specific mythological expression of the hope that the industrial violation of the natural world is not permanent, that the trees will walk, that the rivers will flood, that the patient, accumulated power of the natural world will eventually overcome the artificial power of the industrial system. The restoration of Isengard, the trees replanted, the water flowing, the gardens returning, is the hope made visible. The hope that the industrial landscape can be renaturalized. The hope that the factories can be removed and the land restored. The hope that the damage, though real, is not irreversible. Tolkien was not naive about this hope. He knew that real industrial damage is harder to reverse than mythological industrial damage. He knew that real trees do not walk, and real rivers do not strategically flood the factories that polluted them. But the mythology is not a prediction. It is a hope expressed in the specific, narrative, emotionally resonant form of a story about a fortress that was violated and restored. Part 42. The final image. Here is the image I want to leave you with. The Ring of Stone. 3,000 years old, built by builders whose island is beneath the sea and whose kingdom is a shadow of what it was. The ring stands as it has always stood, through every occupation and every abandonment and every violation and every restoration. Inside the ring, water. The lake that replaced the gardens, that replaced the ruins, that replaced the factory, that replaced the gardens that the Ememrians planted 3,000 years ago. The water is calm. The water reflects the sky. At the center, Orthanc. The Dark Tower. 500 feet of dark, smooth, indestructible stone, rising from the water like the axis of the world. The tower that the Ememrians built, and that nothing, not the Ents, not the flood, not the wizard, not the war, not the passage of 3,000 years, nothing has been able to alter. The tower stands, as it has always stood, as it will always stand. The specific, permanent, unchangeable quality of the Ememrian craft, expressed in dark stone rising from the water into the sky. On the tower's balcony, no one. The wizard is gone. The garrison is gone. The watcher is gone. The tower watches with its own eyes now the blank, dark, smooth surface of the stone, reflecting the world back to itself without commentary or purpose. And around the tower, inside the ring, the trees are growing again. The Ents have planted them. The small, new, young trees growing in the earth that Saruman's pits scarred, growing in the soil that the Ememrian gardens cultivated, growing in the specific quality of restored landscape that carries the memory of everything that happened here. The trees are growing, the tower stands, the ring endures, and the place the specific 3,000-year-old Ememrian built, wizard occupied. Ent restored place the place is what it has always been and what it will always be. A fortress. A watchtower. A garden. A place where the maid and the grown meet and fight and in the mythology's final movement find a way to coexist. That is the complete history of Isengard. From Angrenost to Saruman's Stronghold. From the builders to the wizard to the trees. 3,000 years of stone and purpose, and the specific human mortal quality of choosing what to do with the things we inherit. The fortress does not judge its occupants. The fortress endures them. The Ememrian builders, the Gondorian garrison, the Dunlending settlers, the White Wizard, the Ents, the king who reclaimed the tower, the fortress, endured them all, served them all, survived them all, and in the surviving, the fortress became something more than any of its occupants intended. A record. A 3,000-year record of what happens when mortal wills encounter permanent things, written in stone and water and the specific quality of growing trees that mark the places where the damage was done and the healing began. The stones do not choose. The stones end. The choices are ours. Stay with us. The tower goes deeper than the foundation. And we are not done looking yet.